Again, I'm reading off this really bad script, but I'm not going to make it too formal. Today, everyone, I will be presenting my provenance research on an Egyptian mummy that traveled throughout the northeastern United States in the 19th century. This presentation focuses on the history of the mummy and, at the time, was still an ongoing research project. I haven't done any research on this since I gave this presentation in February 2020, but I think I'd like to someday get back up on it, especially now with my new job, working in kind of genealogy and like research. I think I'd like to get back on it. What was I going to say? Oh, if anybody doesn't know what provenance means, I'm going to type it in the chat so you guys know how to spell it. Provenance. Provenance is different than provenience, which is a similar topic. They're very, very close. And I see a lot of writers confuse them. Provenience has to do with an archaeological artifact and the exact location that it was found in. So if you're digging up a pot, where exactly was that piece found? Could you retrace it all the way back to original photos of the excavation before you pulled it out of the ground? And I will say exact does not mean like I need the exact coordinates. It usually means you need a layer number or at the least a site number and a date that it was found in so that you could go back in records. Provenance is a word that is not just for archaeological items, but also just for generally art items. You can't have a provenience of the Mona Lisa. It doesn't kind of exist. But it does have a provenance. A provenance is the history of that item and who owned that item in particular. So obviously, if you did the provenance of the Mona Lisa, it would start with Leonardo da Vinci, and then whoever he sold it to, or whoever he gave it to, whoever inherited from him, whatever the actual story is. Interestingly, and a complete and utter side note, the provenance of the Mona Lisa would also include that man, I don't know his name, but the man who stole it and kept it in his house in Italy for several years before trying to sell it to an Italian museum. That would be included in the provenance history because we still need to know during this time period where was the actual painting. Of course, even though we didn't know where it was because it was stolen at the time. So, next slide. So, during the summer of 2019, I interned at this museum, which amateur archaeologists and I went to go see. It is called the Alexandria Archaeology Museum in Alexandria, Virginia. It's in Northern Virginia, near where I live. This museum focuses on the local archaeological history and holds a collection of over 2 million archaeological objects. I was presented this archived article from the Alexandria Gazette, dated January 8th, 1829, and was asked to conduct research on this mummy for a potential exhibition. So, a little bit more detail of that. When I was in grad school, I had to do 2 museum internships to fulfill my museum studies graduate certificate. And when it came to finding a museum internship, it proved a little hard. Of course, I was living in Memphis at the time, and there are quite a lot of museums there, but not any museums I really wanted to intern. And so I considered coming back to Northern Virginia, the DC area, to see if I could find an internship here. And I ended up finding the Alexandria Archaeology Museum. I had actually volunteered with them twice before. It was through Alexandria Archaeology that I went on my first archaeological dig. It was a volunteer dig at a site they have behind the Masonic Temple. And then a couple years later, I noticed that they were looking for volunteers to help to help pack up the shipboards from a ship that they found underneath one of the buildings on the edge of Alexandria Harbor. Or Alexandria is situated on the Potomac River, so it has like this big waterfront. And so under this place called the Indigo Hotel, which you can look this up, there's tons of great pictures and interviews with the archaeologists. They found an enormous portion of a ship. And it turns out that they found this, these ships were purposely placed there. They were purposely sunk to then put dirt and soil and rocks to extend the waterfront. So they found this under this hotel. It was then kept in these giant shipping containers, because when something is really, really wet for a long time, you can't just let it dry out. It'll literally disintegrate. So all of the shipboards had to be placed in these giant tanks, and they had a huge fundraising effort called Save Our Ship, which they raised and then sent the ship to, I believe it is Texas A&M has their own conservation center, which at the moment, it's been years now, but at the moment is still conserving this ship. So I helped package, and literally it was a giant wrapping paper situation. We had to first wrap the shipboards in wet paper towels, like really wet paper towels, then plastic wrap to keep the moisture in it, and then foam. And so I volunteered to do that for a couple days, which was really fun. So when I saw that they are kind of always offering interns, I sent them an email and I asked to be an intern there. And they asked me kind of what I would like to do within it, and I told them education, because that was what I was kind of lingering towards doing, some sort of educational archaeology. Because at the moment I had already worked with an educational archaeological firm, so I really enjoyed doing archaeology camps and stuff like that. But lo and behold, I truly never ever thought that I would go into a museum, go into an internship, and get an email from them literally saying, "Wait, you're an Egyptologist? We actually have been wanting someone to do research on an Egyptian mummy that was displayed in Alexandria." And I'm like, what? I'm like, how, like, what are the actual chances that I go to a historical archaeology museum, pretty much only talking about early American history, and they want me to do research on an Egyptian mummy? Like, I mean, I remember walking back in to see my friends in Memphis and saying, "Y'all, I just got this internship and they want me to do research on an Egyptian mummy." And they're like, what are the chances of that? Like, I don't know how that happened. So pretty much what happened is this article, which I'm going to read out in just a second, so anybody who is just listening to my lovely voice can hear. Sorry, I just want to make sure that y'all can hear me. Yeah, okay. During just some other archival research, one of the archaeologists who works with... Hi, Mark! Welcome. No, it's okay. We literally just got started. I just explained that this is the museum that I interned at, called the Alexandria Archaeology Museum, and I was just explaining kind of the story of how I got this internship and how I got working on this project. So the thing I forgot to explain is that the Alexandria Archaeology Museum is a museum that is directly attached to the Alexandria Archaeology program. So they have they have four full-time archaeologists who work there, and then everyone else is pretty much volunteers. But then they have an education archaeologist, and the city of Alexandria is a very, very old city, and in the 70s they got in this archaeology kick, and they were able to put laws into place that every time any sort of construction work was happening in the city of Old Town, we call it Old Town, in Old Town Alexandria, if there's any sort of construction work, an archaeologist has to be there to supervise it and to make sure that there is not some sort of archaeological site underneath it. And so this museum is holding all of those archaeological collections. That's why I said it has 2 million artifacts in it, and that is literally just because it has everything from every archaeological site in the city. And it's not that big of a city. It's not, well, no, it's probably kind of big. We're just south of DC and just north of Mount Vernon, George Washington's house. So during one of the archival research, one of these archaeologists found this article. So I'm going to read out the article for you. Again, you can see that this is a transcription of the original article. I have a better version from a different Alexandria newspaper that I'll show y'all later. So this says, an Egyptian mummy exhibited in Alexandria, Virginia, 1829. So it says, an Egyptian mummy, plate of the coffin. A plate obviously is a carving and then put on an ink plate and then it's kind of stamped. The proprietor begs leave to inform the ladies and gentlemen of Alexandria and its vicinity that an Egyptian mummy will be exhibited at the Indian Queen Tavern, northwest corner of King and St. Asaph Street, for this week only. There is nothing I keep forgetting that I have to read all the way across it. There is nothing upon which the living eye can rest more impressive and interesting than the preserved mortal remains of human beings who inhabited this earth more than 3,000 years ago. Such are the Egyptian mummies, embalmed, bandaged, encased, and preserved in excavated recesses of everlasting rocks. This mummy was brought to this country by Captain Turner from Trieste, at which place it had been received from Thebes. It is very perfect, retaining all the form and features of a human person. It stands in the back part of the coffin, bandaged with numerous thicknesses of twined linen of Egypt. The face, the right arm, and the feet are entirely uncovered. The coffin is said to be of sycamore wood, and is carved and painted in a manner peculiar to the ancient Egyptians. Admittance, only 25 cents. Children, half price. The Alexandria Gazette, dated, this is also the craziest thing. The craziest thing, y'all, if you look there at the bottom, the article is dated to 1/8/1829. And that, not the year, but that is my birthday. So that's when I absolutely kind of freaked out, because I was like, is this made for me? I think this is made for me. So the mummy was there for a full week. And we'll look at a very detailed timeline that I've created about where this mummy was in America, because, oh boy, did this mummy go very far. So this is the original article that the people at Alexandria found, and they had done some very basic preliminary research, some of which I was able to weed out as not being relevant, but mostly was relevant. Oh, I gotta grab the book. If I remember where I put it in my new bookshelf. Here it is. And I think I showed y'all this before, but this is where a lot of the information about this mummy comes from. It's a book by S.J. Wolfe, Mummies in 19th Century America, Ancient Egyptians as Artifacts. It's a great book. I've actually not read it all the way through. I've only really read certain portions of it. But S.J. Wolfe, does it have her? Yeah. S.J. Wolfe is a senior cataloger and serial specialist at the American Antiquarian Society. Over the past 20 years, she has been lecturing on ancient Egyptian culture and presents mummy research. She lives in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I actually emailed and I had correspondence with S.J. Wolfe. She has a pretty great website where she has listed every single Egyptian mummy that was in America in the 19th century and on. So she has a really great website. And this is a very, very good book. I really love this book. Sometimes it's a little missing on citations and such, but most of it is pretty good. And the images are amazing. So after I kind of weeded through the original research, let me just tell you that, I guess I'll just tell you the timeline of this research as well at this point. So I started this internship in summer of 2019. I was doing several other things. This is only 1/3 of the work that I did for the Alexandria Archaeology Museum. I also helped run their kids camp. Hello, Chef Thomas. Welcome, welcome. This is the mummy that we're going to be looking at, and I'm just going to quickly explain what I did when I worked at the Alexandria Archaeology Museum. So 1/3 of the project was working on mummy research. I didn't kind of do that until the very last half because we had particular events happening in the beginning of the summer that I had to work on. But I was mainly an educational intern, so I mainly did research and created lesson plans for both some bus barn events and some the Alexandria Archaeology Kids Camp, which then I helped run. I was one of the main archaeologists on that. And then I just did a lot of little odd jobs. One of the things that you can't see, this is an old picture of what the museum looked like. They just recently redid the floors and a lot of the paint. But behind this, they actually have a lab set up because they have volunteers who come in and do all the lab work and cleaning. And above that was a step-by-step process of how to identify. No, I think it was how to clean artifacts. And I redid that entire panel. And then I created some other signage that went around the exhibit. So I did and then I completely forgot. I also created an entire 3D model of the museum on a program called SketchUp. That was for the redesign that they were doing. And so I helped create an entire 3D model of it. And I will also mention about this mummy project, the intention of the research for this mummy project was to create a small exhibition. That never came to fruition, mostly because I left for the summer. I would love to try and contact them and try to do something now. Thank you, Mark. My throat is always dry. I'm still in contact with them, and I think it would be cool to do an actual exhibition. I also was very interested in doing this presentation to an audience. I was very interested in doing that, especially because there is a organization that I think I've mentioned before called the the American Research Center in Egypt, and they, guess what, also meet in Alexandria, Virginia. The Alexandria, I do have to be hydrated because I am talking way more than normal. And so I also had an idea of inviting the local chapter of RC to sponsor a talk about this topic and do it here. If anybody ever visits Alexandria, this museum is located on the 3rd floor of the Torpedo Factory Art Center. It is built in an old torpedo factory, and all of these little booths are different artists' booths. And so the museum is located on the 3rd floor here. So you get to go pick out really cool, fun art and go to a museum at the same time. At the very end, I will also explain why I created this presentation and why I wrote a almost 40-page paper on this, when obviously this was for an internship and you wouldn't normally write it. And I will explain that at the very end of this presentation, because that's where it makes more sense. So, as this article details, this mummy is called, the museum's been there for a pretty long time. Alexandria has a lovely selection of mini museums. Gatsby's Tavern is a really cool museum. I might talk about that a little bit here. There's also an apothecary museum. There's an African American history museum. What's the other one? There's 5 there's the Carlisle House Museum. I haven't been to many of them. I've only been to Gadsby's Tavern. And unfortunately, when Amateur came and visited, we actually walked around Alexandria because that was like the easiest place for us to both meet up from where we were. And unfortunately, it was a Thursday. And because of COVID, all the museums were closed. They're only open from Friday to Saturday. Or Friday to Sunday. So I was sad. I wanted to take her inside the Alexandria Archaeology Museum, but I couldn't do it. But please, it's a very fun city. It's very cool and old. The other thing I realized that I forgot to point out to amateur archaeologists is that there's this Starbucks that's right there on the waterfront, and the whole building is totally leaning, and it's really funny. It's a very cute little building, but I forgot to point it out to her when we were there. All right. So as the article mentioned, typically when talking about this mummy, it is called Captain Larkin Turner's mummy. To make it even more confusing, there is another Captain Turner who also brought a mummy to America. So you have to make sure you know which one you're talking about when you read it. So the best way to identify it is Captain Larkin Turner's mummy, or, as I'll talk about in a little bit, the possible Egyptian name of this mummy. So this image that you see here is the only known image of this mummy. And as the article mentioned, it's a plate. It is a drawing that somebody made of the mummy, and then they turned it into a carving and then used it for printing. This is the only image we have of it. I will show examples of some possible other images of it, but this is the only image we have. And I know y'all are experts from my hieroglyph lecture, but if you look at these hieroglyphs, they're not that great. They're not that great. And we'll talk about that later as well. But you can understand that this was probably made... Actually, where's my timeline? I have the timeline up. We'll talk about on the timeline, I think, when... I have an estimation of when this drawing of it was first made, but we'll talk about that in a second. As I mentioned, we're going to go through this presentation, and then at the end, I'm going to pull up a much more detailed timeline of where this mummy was and when it was inserted. Giving you late period, we're going to talk about that too, Star. And yeah, it's given me late period too. But we also have to keep remembering, this is a drawing. This is an artistic discovery of a drawing. So, no, that's totally fine. No, it's fine, Star. There's lots of stuff that we'll talk about later. For now, we will talk about the history, we won't talk about the mummy and the actual, like, mummy and the Egyptian portion of this until after. We're going to talk about the timeline first. If they're not great. Oh, yes, Mark. That is why it is in parentheses, or it's in parentheses, in quotations. Yes, so, this is the only known image of the mummy. This mummy was identified as one purchased by Captain Larkin Turner in 1823. So remember that the article we looked at was dated 1829. And this was purchased in 1823 from Trieste, Italy. Trieste is a city in Italy. It is up kind of past Venice, up in like that little like armpit of the Adriatic. At the time, though, it was not Italy. In 1823, Trieste was part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and it was actually their main port. Because most of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire was kind of landlocked, and so Trieste was this port. And we assume, as what the article says, we assume that the mummy came from Thebes, and I know, and it is so crazy. The research, so this is so interesting. So the assumption we have is that the mummy, it says in the article that the mummy was taken from Thebes. We don't know exactly if it was taken from Thebes. It could have been another city, but Thebes was pretty big on the mummy trade during this time period, so we can presume it came from Thebes, and then it was transported to Italy, and it was not purchased by Captain Larkin Turner until it was in Italy. So it obviously was shipped to Italy as literally just like someone will probably buy it. And the funniest thing about it is when I found out that Trieste was kind of this port, I tried to do a lot of research to learn more about Trieste as a port city for Egyptian antiquities, and I found very little research, very little things talking about the city and its role in like Egyptian antiquities trade. But Trieste actually does have their own Egyptology museum, and it's unfortunately they don't have like a really good website, but it seems like they have a good amount of stuff in there, possibly from things that people shipped there and people in Trieste bought rather than people who were traveling elsewhere. So after the mummy was purchased in 1823, it arrived in Boston, ironically, also on my birthday, January 8th, 1824. So what is that? 5 years to the day before it arrived in Alexandria, Virginia, it arrived in Boston, Massachusetts. And this was the second mummy to arrive in America. The second full mummy, I also have to mention that, is the second full mummy that arrived in America. There's another mummy, where's my book? That is the first mummy is called Potty Hair Chef, and the mummy was exhibited at Boston's Massachusetts General Hospital, and I believe it is still located in that hospital in Boston. Yes, I know. That's why I was like, not the exact birthday, but I think it's just, that was one of the crazy reasons where I was like, wow, this project has literally fell into my lap. Because again, this is a historical archaeology museum. This has absolutely nothing to do with Egyptology. I was just doing this because I needed an internship for credit, and I needed, I already had worked with Alexandria before, and I knew it was close to where I lived. And I knew that I could move back to DC for the summer and work here. But this was like literally like, it's mayonnaise on my face every night. That's my secret. Or I'm a vampire. You can pick and choose which one you like better, Chef Thomas. Tracy is also working on some of the first potential tattoo needles. Interesting. That's so interesting. Whoa. That's great. That's wild. Alright, so where was I? So this mummy was actually, when it arrived in Boston, was examined and authenticated by 3 medical doctors. And then it went on tour for the next 41 years. We'll talk about the 3 medical doctors later when we look at the more detailed timeline of everything. It's so interesting. Thank you, Cristiano Vibes. Thank you so much for the follow. Welcome. Welcome to the lecture. My name is Melissa. I am an Egyptologist and archaeologist, and I play Egyptology and archaeology video games, as well as giving Egyptology and archaeology lectures. This is a personal research project on this particular mummy, which we will be investigating together. The tattooing in ancient Egypt. Yeah, definitely post that. That'll be cool. I'll have to watch that. So again, we will be looking at a very more detailed timeline, just so we can talk about it. But it was on tour for 41 years, and we'll be looking at all the specific places it went and the newspaper articles that I found. The entirety of this research comes from the archived newspaper articles advertising this mummy. This stereotype plate is the specific name of what this type of plate is called, is the only known image of the mummy, who is frequently referred to as, and I quote, the mortal remains of a lady of high rank. Again, as Mark pointed out, the hieroglyphs are really, or as I pointed out, the hieroglyphs are really bad, and as Mark pointed out, it's very hard to identify this as a lady of high rank. Especially because we don't have any evidence of what any of this color is. This crown could be gold. Her face could be made out of gold. Things like that would help us determine the rank of this woman. But we only have a black and white image, unfortunately, which is just sad. And we will also kind of talk about how this might not even be a woman. And it was very, very, very common for about this time to make assumptions as to who the mummy was, and what their rank was, or what their oh yeah, for sure, Mark. There was also very frequent, like, just making up of titles. Chantress is an extremely common title that I think a lot of female mummies were given, because it's a frequent title. It's a frequent title of women in ancient Egypt, chantress, songstress, or something like that. Oh yeah, Mark. We gotta talk about that. Coming up. I would love to do one. It'd be great. We could collab. That'd be so much fun. But yeah, so it's very unlikely that, I mean, she very easily could have been a lady of high rank, but it's unlikely. We cannot tell that from this one image. Supposedly, again, like from when I read out the article, the mummy's face, right hand, and feet were supposedly unwrapped. This was done possibly in Egypt, or when the doctors authenticated it in Boston. Could have literally been at any point. I could see both instances happening. I lean a little bit more towards the Boston doctors unwrapping portions of her body, because I will, if I have time, talk about, I have to see if I can find the research about it. There was an instance in New York in the 1800s of two guys faking a mummy. Like, they made like a fake mummy and then they got caught, and it's really funny. So this mummy was literally like authenticated, like that it was human remains. Oh yes, Chantress falls into the quote-unquote exoticism that Egypt exposed in people, the love of the exotic and such, and Chantress is something that is very enchanting and really just like pulls you in. Yeah, for sure. Okay. In two accounts, the mummy was placed in both an inner and an outer coffin, and I'll talk about those as well. Another article claimed that the interior of one of the coffins was decorated with the image of the goddess Isis in profile. So yeah, so this is the only image we have. So we cannot tell if this is, if it does have two coffins, we have no idea which coffin this is. We don't know. It's hard to tell. I will explain some iconography issues that would slightly imply that this was an outer coffin, but we wouldn't know what the inner coffin looks like at all. So, oh no, go back, go. All right, this is the best part of this presentation. So, parents, I specifically mean of this PowerPoint because I worked so hard to make this look cool. And again, we will be talking about this timeline in much more detail. So, after arriving in Boston on January 8th, 1824, Captain Turner's mummy was displayed at Mr. Dodgett's Repository of the Arts in Boston. It then moved to Salem, Massachusetts, where an anonymous admirer wrote that the mummy had already attracted hundreds of spectators. This is an image of the actual building that it most likely was displayed in. The mummy then traveled north to Newburyport, Massachusetts, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Again, another image of one of the buildings that it was displayed in. It was supposed to visit Northampton, Massachusetts in the summer of 1824. Whoa! Welcome, always. Thank you so much for the follow. Hello, hello. How are you tonight? I kind of love your name. It's a little weird, but I kind of like it. Welcome to the lecture. We're talking about this Egyptian mummy that traveled around the United States in the early 1800s. So it was supposed to visit Northampton, Massachusetts, all the way kind of over there in Western Mass, in the summer or autumn of 1824, but there is no evidence that it ever reached there. In May of 1824, the mummy traveled back to Dodgett's repository, where it eventually was purchased by Ethan Allen Greenwood, this man here in the center, a businessman who was opening a series of museums. And I would like everyone to guess. I would like everyone just to throw out a number. How much do you think that this man in the center paid for our lovely mummy? We don't have any evidence of how much Captain Larkin Turner purchased the mummy for, but we are talking 1824. Just throw out some guesses. How much American dollars did he pay for potentially 2 coffins and a mummy inside the coffin? And I will wait, because I'm very interested in what you guys think a mummy would cost at that time period. I'm gonna take a drink of water. Hello, interplanetary iguanas. Interplanetary iguana says $25. I'll give y'all a hint, it's a little more than that. Star says $1. It's definitely a little bit more than that. Again, you also have to think, I'm an Egyptologist. I know how much these things cost, like insurance wise. So what I have, my opinion of what low is might not be the opinion of what other people think low is. So maybe that $100, a little higher. Knowing antiquarianism a lot, so maybe about 100K, way lower than 100K, absolutely way lower. In reference, interplanetary iguanas a little bit higher, but way lower than 100K. Again, I don't know what inflation, how much it would be. After I tell y'all, somebody go up and look up the inflation rate, because actually I might look up the inflation rate right now. Inflation calculator. A little bit higher in interplanetary iguanas. Oh, see, that's I literally looked up a calendar and it only starts in 1913. 1913, that's like I need, here we go. From what date? 1824. Oh my god, that's so low. All right, y'all are in the ballpark, so I will tell you. So Ethan Allen Greenwood purchased this mummy for $350 in 1824. And according to this inflation calculator, that is about $9,870.97. He purchased this thing for a little under 10K, and that is mind-blowing to me. Because, oh my god, $9,000, that's so low. Granted, this mummy wouldn't be, granted, we don't know if this mummy had gold on it, we don't know if it did have 2 coffins and a mummy inside, like, I don't know the specifics of this, but, oh, also, if you missed that, Mark, it was 25 cents per person, and children were half off. All of these places, I believe it's always 25 cents per person. So we'll have to see what happens. And we also have no idea how much Captain Turner purchased this in Italy. We have no idea how much he purchased it for. So who knows if Ethan Allen Greenwood got a good deal or got a bad deal. I don't know. And the other key thing to mention is Captain Turner purchased this mummy, but Captain Turner was a sea captain. He had a boat. he was obviously not the person who was traveling around with this mummy. So I think there might be evidence that this mummy was purchased by somebody else, because Captain Turner is not going to be a person who's going to be wandering around taking this mummy, transporting it by carriage. Remember, we're not talking cars yet. By carriage to all of these places. Hello, Uncle Bill, welcome. We are doing a lecture about I keep doing it wrong, this Egyptian mummy. Oh, thank you so much, Uncle Bill, for hosting. We're doing a lecture about this Egyptian mummy that's up on the screen. We're looking at all the places that it visited, literally was put on tour and put on display for people to see in the 1820s going on. This is a personal research project that I did when I worked at the Alexandria Archaeology Museum in Virginia. And we just discussed that this man in the center, Ethan Allen Greenwood, purchased this mummy for $350, which is the equivalent of $9,870 today. Was this back in when people were eating mummies? I would say this is after. I'm trying to think when was Napoleon's exhibition, when did Siri, when did Napoleon go to Egypt?
Here's what I found from Wikipedia.org in April 7.
Okay, so Napoleon went to Egypt in 1796. So I think we've reached a point where they've probably stopped destroying mummies to eat. I think that was it was called Mummia. I think that was more of a medieval, yes, I have an Australian. Thank you. I think when I had my first phone, I changed my, I changed my Siri and my maps to an Australian man, and I've just never changed it back. I'm so used to it. Or British man. He might be a British man. I don't know. I don't know. I just wanted to hear one to talk to me. But yeah, so I think we have reached the point, where I think people are slightly more respectful, and I'm saying slightly, in that they're just unwrapping, and they're unwrapping it for a purpose of slight gain of knowledge. At this point, we're still having these, like, the mummy unwrapping parties. We're still having, like, the Victorian unwrapping parties, and those are coming from more of a, what we'll say, the freak show, quote unquote, freak show, like, aspect and stuff. But like, I think we're reaching a point where we're getting to a little bit more scientific study. Obviously, this is not scientific study. This is purely on a, let's show off this cool thing that I got, and make up crap about it. They didn't really care more about deals, but more about the prestige. Yes, very true. This is also very true from, like, a prestige standpoint. I have a family member that has an Irish one because she's like Moriarty. Yeah. It's whatever you like. So I think we've reached a point where we're heading towards scientific discovery, but we're still kind of working on how to do that. So Ethan Allen Greenwood was opening a series of museums. He has a couple of them. I'll talk about some of the specific ones when we look at the more detailed timeline. But after he purchased this in May of 1824, the mummy went back up north all the way to Portland, Maine, where the mummy, so this specifically went to Greenwood's Portland Museum in Maine. So one of the museums he had was called the Portland Museum. Didn't unwrapping usually break the mummy? Yes. Not all the time. I won't say all the time. But thank you, Mark, for defending my Instagram. And I do technically have access to it. It just won't post the things that I want to post. But yes, mummies Thank you, the honeycomb system. Well, thank you for the follow. Welcome to the lecture. So unwrapping the mummies didn't always break them. In certain time periods of ancient Egyptian mummification practices, they did something where they would usually pour resin over the body. In those cases, yes, pulling linen off would severely damage the mummy. A lot of mummies that we see that were unwrapped a long time ago, like say in antiquity, frequently have huge injuries where, like tomb robbers. So tomb robbers who right immediately after the mummies were mummified were unwrapping the mummy to get all of the jewelry off of them. They have sustained serious damage. I can't think of, there's a female mummy, I think it's Tia's like whole, like her whole like chest and like stomach are just like kind of all the skin on the stomach is just completely missing because that obviously was torn off with the linen bandages. But we do have some examples where the bandages have been removed and the mummies are actually in pretty good condition. Again, we do not unwrap mummies now. We do this for two reasons. We do this, one, out of respect for the human being, because they did not expect to be in a museum or in a research center for the rest of their life. So we would much rather keep them wrapped and keep their dignity. And we have ways now that we can learn about them without unwrapping them. And thanks, Star. I couldn't remember which one it was. TA has the problem with her jaw, but that actually is an injury to her, not yeah, I think that might be the one I'm thinking of. But the other reason we don't unwrap mummies is because it is a conservation nightmare. Because we don't know what will happen. We cannot prepare for every sort of problem that we're going to have with unwrapping. Yeah, they did get some slightly better. I know. I must be thinking of someone totally. Oh, I am thinking of somebody else. I'm thinking of the bald woman that they all think might be Nefertiti. That's who I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of the younger woman, the one with the giant face problem. She's totally bald. TA, I just realized TA's with the hair. But yeah, they did. Some of these antiquated archaeologists did find some better ways to learn how to unwrap mummies, but it's just a practice we don't do anymore. So again, they went up to the Portland Museum, Greenwood's Portland Museum in Maine. And this is one of my favorite newspaper articles. We'll read this in more detail later, but the newspaper advertised that a 3,000-year-old lady, quote unquote, old lady, had arrived in town. Yeah, some of the scans are amazing. Like, you can't even believe. Okay, TA does have a hole, but it's nowhere near as large as the younger lady. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. So the newspapers advertised that a 3,000-year-old lady has arrived in town. Next, it traveled down to Greenwood's New Providence Museum in Providence, Rhode Island. And as you can see, I took this map. I don't know when this map exactly dates to, but I tried to pick a map. When I created this, I went to a website where I found really old maps, and so I tried to pick one that had truly like the road systems to show y'all what kind of journey this mummy is taking, because it is not, it is on a carriage. It's definitely on some sort of carriage, like because there was no other real transportation to get to anywhere at the time. True, we can sometimes learn more from x-raying than unwrapping, for sure. So after the New Providence Museum, it went back up to Boston again, where it was displayed with 2 other recently purchased mummies in the New England Museum in Boston. I'm going to quickly move my face so you can see. Here is our mummy that we're talking about, and these are 2 other mummies that were purchased by Greenwood. This flyer, we will look at this flyer later. This flyer gives us some of the most detailed information about the mummy that we are looking at. It is described here. This is one of the main flyers that actually gave us information that this might have been it might have had 2 coffins with it. I am actually going to move this around so that just grab what I actually want to grab. There we go. Okay. In February of 1824. So this whole thing, all of this journey has all been in 1824. It went a lot of places in 1824. Sorry, that must be 1825. I mean, in February of 1825, it moved to John Scudder's American Museum, located in downtown New York City. The mummy then disappears from the newspapers for a little over 3 years. That's a good question. And I'm going to consult my book to find out because I got this thing from this image of this from Mummies in 19th Century America. So 2 mummies from the Peregrine. So let me see if I can find out. The Peregrine. So as I mentioned, I've read this book, but not in completion because I was only really researching this one mummy. So I'm not exactly sure where these mummies ended up. But actually, give me 1 second. This is actually a good idea. I'm gonna look up something. I gotta find where it is. I haven't been to this website in so long. Oop, sorry, wrong one. Okay, so this is a website called Mummy Mania. Here is S.J. Wolf, the woman who purchased or who wrote this book. And so she has this website that has an overview of all of the different mummies. Oh, here it is. So this is part of the EMINA project, which is called the Egyptian Mummies in North America project. So I think if I go here, I wonder, I gotta find where. I might need to go to another website. Here we go. Search the mummy database. Yes. Let's see if I can. Let's see what I can look up. So this is what EMINA is. It is a little research database. And so I'm trying to see if I can. What was the name of those mummies? Do we know what they were called? Let's just see if I type in Peregrine. Here we go. The 2 mummies. Here we go. So this is a really, really cool thing. Because we have the name of it, we now have a mini provenance of these museums, of these mummies. So 2 mummies, one is a male and one is a female. We don't know their names. So the owner was the Peregrine Mummies in Boston, and then it looks like it was owned by Ethan Allen Greenwood, who is who we just talked about. Sorry, let me zoom in on this so y'all can read this. And that was in Boston, and then it looks like it might have been owned by the New England Museum and Gallery of Fine Arts, which is not the Boston Museum. And so now it looks like it might be at the Harvard Museum. I'm assuming by normal provenance standards, the last thing would be where it is currently located. So it could be at the Harvard Museum. The male mummy, again, was at the New England, so pretty much the same place. And then it says the Boston Society of Natural History, and then Ethan Allen Greenwood. And so they both look like they're at Harvard, Harvard University's Peabody Museum. Now let us quickly go. I don't know if Harvard Museum has a collection. Harvard Peabody Museum. Collections online. Except mummy. I know, it's one of my museums that I had to go see. It's on my list. I don't think that's it. Isn't this fun, y'all? Taking a little detour to see if we can find this mummy. Unfortunately, that you can see some of these don't have the full photos. So... And then I will say, different museums' catalogs use different terminology. Like, I could write human remains. Would that be better? Would that be worse? We don't know. Because I just put in mummy, I'm getting a lot of random stuff. Maybe I should type in coffin. Let's type in coffin, see what we get. There's a base of a coffin. And you see how these are photos? Let's do archaeological. I know. So yeah, so unfortunately the only thing that comes up is this. Coffin with no lid. So that's probably not what we're looking for. Let's see what we get with human remains. Sometimes this will help you. How many did I get? Oh, I got 18,000. So that does not help me. So, mummy. Mummy was apparently a better search. But we could do culture. We can do... Let's do provenance. Let's do Egypt. And it'll be easier. So I think that might be one of them. Because there's not a lot of other coffins here. Oop, I accidentally clicked all the way to the end. See, look, see, they say they have all these mummies, but the media is restricted. So we can't see what images there are. And these are photos, I think, which is also not helpful. So we had a discussion about this a couple lectures ago. Technically, I believe some people use coffin for wooden coffins and sarcophagi for stone coffins, if that makes sense. It's not a universal rule. It's not a universal rule. I don't think everybody like believes that or uses that. But I believe technically you would call it a coffin a wood coffin and a stone sarcophagus. You wouldn't call it a stone coffin or a wooden sarcophagus. Well, see, but the thing is, I think people have used it so interchangeably That is a good point. Yeah, Chef Thomas says that sarcophagus is about stone. But the problem, I think, is that people use it so interchangeably. I'm kind of fine with it, but I'm always fine with just saying, yeah, like, it's, you can use it either way. Yeah, let's see, maybe, let's just do, for the last thing, let's see if I can get Peregrine and see what that comes up with. Nothing. Alright. 'Tis fine. But yeah, so it looks like, based off of looking through, the Emina, that those, mummies are in the Harvard Museum. Obviously, it's not the best resource. It doesn't give us everything. This book might say where those two are located, but I might not have just reached that point in the book to find out. I will say certain parts of this book are very hard to decipher. I would have much preferred a chapter by chapter of talking about one particular mummy and then talking about another particular mummy. It's a little bit as they're all mixed together because a lot of them also thank you so much, the Jetra, for the follow. Welcome to the lecture. Yes, you would think their catalog would have some better provenance info. Unfortunately, it doesn't. I believe Miss S.J. Wolf has done this all herself. She's a very lovely lady. I was very honored for her to email me back and give me some information. I ended up purchasing this book because of this research, but she actually gave me the she actually sent me the Word document for the appendix. Actually, maybe it's in the appendix. Oh yeah, it might be in here. And I misspoke at the beginning. It wasn't that there were two Captain Turners, there were two Captain Larkins. So we have Larkin Turner, and then there's also a Larkin Thorndike Lee. Thank you so much, Dapper Historian, for the follow. What a great name. I hope you're very dapper. I love it. Unfortunately, this appendix just describes what the coffin looks like, and it doesn't tell us where they currently are, which is a bummer. I'm gonna look it up. I'm gonna read this book in more detail. And I don't have any post-it notes. Except this stupid post-it note that says Worcestershire on it because I was testing myself and spelling it. But I spelled it wrong. Look up other Peregrine mummies location. I'm gonna try to do that. I'm gonna try to figure it out. Because who asked that? Was that Pode? Yeah, Pode. I will mention most of the mummies that are in this book I think are still in existence. We will find out where this one is. Unfortunately, if the title is missing, y'all have a little idea of what happened to it. Alright, so again, after it went to New York City, it went to a place called Scudder's American Museum. And again, this isn't where this mummy was purchased. This mummy was on tour. It was like a traveling exhibition. This mummy, after May of 1824, it was owned by Ethan Allen Greenwood, and he was supplying its travel to go to all of these different places. I do my best here to learn more about this. I only know about the Georgian, Victorian, British, European Egyptology craze. Fascinating to hear more. Oh, thank you so much, Dapper Historian. Yeah, this is a personal project that I did when I was an intern at the Alexandria Archaeology Museum in Virginia. And this mummy was on display in the city in 1829. And so I did research on this mummy. I'm a huge Egyptology fan. as you can see by all the Egyptomania, I mean to say, sorry. I am an Egyptologist. I'm a huge Egyptomania fan, so I have lots of Egyptomania, and this falls very deeply into the Egyptomania of early America. And so it makes sense why I continue to do research on Egyptomania because of this project. So, after it traveled down to New York City in February of, I believe, 1825, it was in downtown New York City. In the later presentation, I have where John Scudder's American Museum is, and we'll actually look at. I could pull it up on Google Maps where it is actually located in New York City. Some of these places are very specific. It'll tell you where the actual, like, the streets of where these buildings are. Some of them are not as specific. And after it was in New York City, it disappeared from the newspapers for 3 years. Presumably it was still traveling around, but I have found no newspaper evidence of where it was. This could be from a simple misunderstanding that if this mummy is not called Captain Turner's mummy, we don't know which going back. If the newspaper articles do not mention, one, that this is Captain Turner's mummy, or it does not include an image of this mummy, I cannot determine if this is Captain Turner's mummy that is being talked about in the article, because there were about a dozen different Egyptian mummies that were traveling around Northeast America during this time period. So it's kind of impossible to tell unless they specifically call it Captain Turner's Egyptian mummy or have that one image that we have of it. So that's why the 3 years there might actually be articles in existence, but it's like I can't tell which one it is because it doesn't tell me which mummy it is. But it does in April of 1827, so 2 years after the last known sighting, we have an unknown mummy was displayed in Middletown, Connecticut. Again, this was an article about a mummy being displayed, but it doesn't say that it's Captain Turner's, and it doesn't show an image, so we don't know which one it is. Though it is unclear which mummy was being exhibited, an undated broadside pamphlet, which you can see there at the bottom, places Captain Turner's mummy in Lyme, Connecticut, only 25 miles away. And so it has been speculated that Captain Turner's mummy and the unknown mummy from Middletown are the one and the same. So here are two very big problems with provenance. The mummy that was in Middletown, we don't know what mummy it was. And this very distinctly broadside that talks about our mummy does not have a date on it. So we unfortunately are missing like two things. But based off of that, these towns are only 25 miles apart, we can presume that the mummy visited either before or after April 1827, maybe within a month or two on either side, that it could have also been here in that time period. So this is my favorite part of the research. Is this my favorite part? Yeah, I think this might be, this is my second favorite part of this research. When Greenwood purchased this mummy in May of 1824, pamphlets were printed out to advertise the exhibition. This 8-page pamphlet features a description of the mummy, which I will read out to y'all, and the coffin, multiple biblical accounts of Egyptian mummification practices, and a poem called An Address to the Mummy, which I will also read out to you guys. I might read that one out actually instead of the description. There is only one surviving copy that I know of, one surviving copy of this pamphlet, and it is located at the University of Virginia's Special Collections Library. And it was originally purchased from an antique collector in Newburyport, Newburyport, Massachusetts. An inscription on the first page reads, R. Middlebrook, May of 1827. It is unclear where this pamphlet was initially handed out, because there is no evidence where this mummy was in 1827. Thank you so much for the libation. I will drink. So this is the craziest part. So we know that in April of 1827, it was somewhere, it could have been somewhere in Connecticut. But we also know that the year prior, a couple years prior in 1824, it did visit Newburyport, Massachusetts. So either this pamphlet was handed, either the mummy toured through came back to Newburyport, Massachusetts, and where these pamphlets were made, in 1827, or this is an original from when it was there before. It's so confusing. We don't know when this dates to. Well, we know when this dates to, but we don't know where this mummy was, because we can't really tell if I don't know where the antique dealer got it. I actually did email the antique dealer to try to find out where this pamphlet originally came from. And I have a very great story about this pamphlet. So, as y'all know, I live in Northern Virginia. So when I did this research and I discovered that there was this pamphlet, I wanted to go and see it. So I made an appointment at the University of Virginia's Special Collection Library. Well, the other thing is I didn't know if I could get there. I didn't know if I could see the item. And if y'all didn't know, my parents and my brother all went to University of Virginia. And my brother was still at University of Virginia at the time. And he needed to move from his old apartment to his new apartment. And my mom could not go. My dad could not go. And my mom asked me if I would go. And I said, I will go on one condition. And she's like, what's the condition? I told her I will only go if I can leave for like an hour or two and go to UVA's Special Collections Library and go and look and take photos of this pamphlet. Because at the time I only had this cover photo, which is in the center. And she said, as long as like Steven's okay with it, yeah, you can do that. And I was like, okay, cool. So I made an appointment to go see this item, and we're driving to UVA. It takes about 3 hours or so. 30 minutes before we get there, I get a call from the library saying that they cannot locate this item. This item was missing, which I found extremely ironic considering the mummy itself is also missing. So I was like, really? Whoa. Why? I know you have it in your collection. You can look it up. It has a collection number. It has a library number. It was missing. They could not find it. They told me it was a recent acquisition. So they had it was just purchased. And they didn't know where it was. I don't believe in Bubby's curse, Charlie's dragon, but it is a little unlucky. We'll say it's very unlucky. So no, I did not get to see it in person. About maybe 2 months later, that's why you're teasing about it. I know. It is a very unlucky mummy, I have to say, unfortunately. And y'all will find out why. A couple months later, I think 2 months later, they actually did send me, they found it and they scanned me a copy. So this is images of the scanned copy, which obviously I think is actually better because I wasn't going to take great photos of it, but like, I think it's it's better that they gave me a nice scan. But I did feel like a total like dick because I was still interning at that time. I told everyone, hey, I'm gonna go see it. And they were all like, oh my God, it's so exciting. That's gonna be great. And then I came back and they were like, how was it? And I was like, I didn't see it. They lost it. And they were like, are you kidding me? And it was like a whole thing. But yes, I asked them very explicitly. I was like, I only have the front copy of this. I really would like to see what else is in the packet. True. But I like Unlucky Mummy. I think Unlucky Mummy sounds very funny. And I just rhymed again. So, I'm gonna read out the poem probably, but I'm gonna point out some of the interesting things from this pamphlet. So the first paragraph is actually what we already read from the article in Alexandria, but this is where it lists number 1 and number 2. So number 1, Egyptian mummy taken from a recently discovered catacomb or apartments excavated out of solid rock in the ancient city of Thebes on the Nile in Egypt. It is bandaged with numerous thicknesses of 4-strand linen, called in the scriptures fine twined linen. The mummy is placed on the lower part of a sarcophagus or coffin, which is made out of the sycamore wood covered with Egyptian cement, and painted on it is a representation of the goddess Isis in profile. Number 2 is the lid or top of the sarcophagus or coffin. It is very rudely carved and covered with cement, on which is painted the hieroglyphic, if you can see it's spelled P-H-I-C-K, which is interesting, characters, the history of the deceased person, which is but little understood by the present age, over which is the winged globe emblematic of eternity or all its protecting deity. The mummy was brought to this country by Captain Turner of Charlestown and was opened in the presence of several learned gentlemen. The following certificate was given by Dr. Warren, a professor at Harvard College. At the request of Captain Turner of Charlestown, I have examined a mummy brought here by him, and can certify that the same appears to me to be true and genuine Egyptian mummy. John C. Warren. And so I think the address of the mummy is actually a little bit longer. So I have the whole thing here. Again, the rest of this pamphlet just talks about some biblical stories about mummification. And they're really weird, and I can read them maybe later. But I want to read out this poem because, oh God, this poem's 2 full pages. Okay, we're going to read it out because it's funny. And hast thou walked about, how strange a story, in Thebes streets 3,000 years ago, when the Memnonium was all in its glory, and time had not begun to overthrow those temples, palaces, and piles stupendous, of which the very ruins are tremendous. Speak, for thou long enough hast act dummy, thou hast tongue, come, let us hear its tune. Thou'rt standing on thy legs above ground, mummy, revisiting the glimpses of the moon, not like thin ghosts or disembodied creatures, but with thy bones and flesh and limbs and features. Tell us, for doubtless thou canst recollect, to whom we should assign the Sphinx fame. Was Cheops, that's Khufu, that's the Greek version of King Khufu's name, or Kephren, I think that's Khafre? Someone may correct me on that one. Architect of either pyramid that bears his name, or Pompey's pillar, really a misnomer, had Thebes 100 gates as sung by Homer. Perhaps thou wast... Is that my phone? Sorry. It was my phone. I thought I heard it in my earbuds, which was really weird. Where was I? Perhaps thou wast a mason. So don't forget, people thought that the Masons were started in ancient Egypt and kind of went on, which is why like the Illuminati pyramid and like the pyramid that's on like the dollar bill, like that's all Masons stuff, because they thought that they traced their like line back to ancient Egypt. Perhaps thou wast a mason, and forbidden by oath to tell the mysteries of thy trade. Then say what secret melody was hidden in Memnon, that's Ramses, statue, which at sunrise played. Except Ramses, not Ramses, sorry. Memnon was a fictional, like, strong man, and so the statue of Memnon, I still do believe is Ramses the Great. It might be Amenhotep III. I'm really bad at remembering who the... No, I think it is. I think it is Ramses the Great. But they called him Memnon originally, just because they assumed that he was this great strong man from ancient times. Perhaps thou wast a priest. If so, my struggles are vain, for priestcraft never owns its juggles. Perchance that very hard, now pinned flat, hast hobnobbed with Pharaoh, glass to glass, or drop a halfpenny in Homer's hat, or doffed thine own to let Queen Dido pass, or held by Solomon's own invitation a torch at the great temple's dedication. I need not ask thee if that hand, when armed, has any Roman soldier mauled and knuckled, for thou wast dead and buried and embalmed, ere Romulus and Remus have been suckled. Halfway through. Oh yeah, you're right. It is Agamemnon. You're totally right, Chef Thomas. I think that who they say Memnon is. Why didn't I think of that? I know about Agamemnon. It's so weird. Antiquity appears to have begun long after thy primeval race was run. Thou couldst have developed if that withered tongue might tell us what those sightless orbs have seen, how the world looked when it was fresh and young, and the great deluge still had left its green. Or was it then so old that history's pages contained no record of its early ages? Still silent, incommunicative elf, art sworn to secrecy, then keep thy vows, but prithee tell us something of thyself, reveal the secrets of thy prison house, since in the world of spirits thou hast slumbered, what hast thou seen, what strange adventurers numbered? Since first thy form was in this box extended, what have above ground seen some strange mutations? The Roman Empire has begun and ended, new worlds have risen, we have lost old nations, and countless kings have into dust been humbled, while not a fragment of thy fresh flesh has crumbled. Didn't thou not hear the pother o'er thy head, when the great Persian conqueror Cambyses marched armies over thy tomb with thundering tread, through Osiris, Horus, Apis, Isis, and shook the pyramids with fear and wonder, when the gigantic Memnon fell asunder? If the tomb's secrets may not be confessed, the nature of thy private life unfold. A heart has throbbed beneath that leathern breast, and tears adown the dusty cheek have rolled. How children climbed those knees and kissed that face. What was thy name and station, age, and race? Statue of flesh, immortal of the dead, imperishable type of evanescence. Posthumous man who quits thou thy narrow bed and standest undecayed within our presence. Thou wilt hear nothing till the judgment morning, when the great thump shall thrill thee with its warning. Why should this worthless tegument endure of it, if its undying guest be lost forever? Oh, let us keep the soul embalmed and pure in living virtue, that when both must sever, although corruption may our frame consume, the immortal spirits in the skies may bloom. I love that poem. I actually have never read that all the way through, but man, what was the line I really liked? And countless kings have into dust been humbled, while not a fragment of thy flesh has crumbled. I think that's my favorite line. So yeah, this is from Belzoni's exhibition. Apparently the poem is by a man named Campbell. Belzoni, if y'all don't know, is a crazy strong man who became a adventurer, pretty much. I'm not going to call him an archaeologist. He's an adventurer. He's a crazy, adventurer. But yeah, so this is the only surviving copy that we have of this, and it is located in Virginia, and I would like to go see it in person someday, because it's pretty cool. And so if you see, actually, it says Egyptian mummy, and then it says to be exhibited at, and then it's blank, and that would be for people to literally write in what location they were seeing the mummy at. So let's get back to the map. So we had to jump ahead to 1827. There were 3 years where we didn't really have a lot of things going on. But in July of 1827, Captain Turner's mummy arrived all the way in Buffalo, New York, and a month later was displayed in Rochester, New York. The Buffalo location was a completely new location. Again, a lot of this research was done by S.J. Wolf. She had a very good timeline of where this mummy was. But when I connected my research, I found, I believe, 2, possibly 3 new places that this mummy had been. So this is one of my little prides of glory that I was able to find, that we had absolutely no idea that this mummy was in Buffalo. And that's this article. Whoa, what happened? That's this article right here. And this article gives us a lot of great information. This is one of the pretty long articles. This one you can see from Rochester is pretty short and sweet, and this one too. And again, a lot of these articles repeated themselves. A lot of the articles had the exact same text, every single one, because it was the job of whoever was taking this mummy on display to send ahead to other museums and other towns what to write in the newspapers. The mummy then moved next all the way down to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and it specifically moved to James Lambdin's Museum of Natural History and Gallery of Fine Arts. The dates are unfortunately unknown. We don't know when it actually was on display there, but we can presume it's sometime after 1827, because this museum only opens in September of 1828, so it had to arrive sometime after that. In December of 1828, the mummy traveled to towns in Maryland, including Hagerstown, Williamsport, Funkstown, and Boonesboro. And finally, the mummy arrived in Alexandria, Virginia, on January 8th, 1829, 5 years to the day after it arrived in America. So if you remember from the article that I showed you at the very beginning, that was a transcription where somebody had transcribed all of these newspaper articles, but this is an example of the actual article that was written, not actually for the Alexandria Gazette, for another Alexandria newspaper that it was also advertised in. So this is an old image of what Alexandria looked like. It is a very perfectly gridded city, and with all of the different streets here. And again, this is an historical map, so this is actually before a lot of the waterfront was added onto later. So Captain Turner's mummy was on display for at least a week at a tavern called the Indian Queen. It was on the northwest corner of King and St. Asaph Street. It was owned by a man named John Wise, who was a businessman in Alexandria and Washington, D.C., who owned several properties and taverns in Alexandria and D.C. He owned a museum. He owned a tavern, which is now called Gadsby's Tavern, and there's actually a museum. And you can go around Gadsby's Tavern and go and see all the different rooms that you could have stayed in the tavern. And they also have a lovely dining room restaurant where everyone dresses up in colonial wear and you can go eat dinner there. And I've heard it's actually pretty reasonably priced and pretty fun to go, which I think is really, really cool. I do actually want to show y'all one other thing. So this is an image of Alexandria. This is Google Maps. This is King Street. So King Street is kind of the main street of Alexandria. And you can see a lot of the buildings are kind of new. They're the more historical buildings. Actually, let's go down King Street for just a sec. I'm gonna take you all the way down to the waterfront. And we'll go back up. So here we are. This is the lovely torpedo factory, and the Alexandria Archaeology Museum or actually not up that corner. I'll show you. It's up on the third corner. But this is the historic waterfront, and this is where they found a lot of ships and where a lot of archaeology is going on. Here is actually a little information panel about the archaeology here. This is the Starbucks that's leaning very heavily. It's more obvious in person. The Alexandria Archaeology Museum is right up here in the corner of the torpedo factory. And these are a lot of historical buildings that come up on King Street. There's lots of really great restaurants and historical stuff. And actually, let's... no, the tavern is one. The tavern's one street up. This is where you can go get a ghost tour of Alexandria, and a friend of mine works on the ghost stores, which is really cool. Historic Town Hall. I'm just giving y'all a tour. And then we have... Oh, I went down the wrong side street. There's also a free trolley, which I took for the first time. That gives you lots of crazy fun facts. Oh crap, I went one street too far. Excuse me while I... Here we go. Here's Gadsby's Tavern. You can see a little sign there. Here's Gadsby's Tavern. This is where the restaurant is. And this is the lovely museum. You can go all the way up to the 4th floor, which is really cool. And it's right next to City Hall. Uh-oh. I went too far. Where the heck is King's? Where's... That's City Hall. Where's King Street? So what I wanted to show you is where the tavern was actually located. So the tavern was located at... Where was it? It was the northwest corner... The northwest corner of King and St. Asaph's. So here is King and St. Asaph's. So this is where the tavern would have been originally located. And just to be fun, it is a Chipotle. It is currently a Chipotle. You can see right here. It is a Chipotle Mexican grill. And just to add a little bit of stupid signs that I see in the world around me. Again, it was a sign that this historical archaeology museum asked me to do research on a mummy. It was a sign that the mummy both entered Boston and came to Alexandria on my birthday. And then the third sign was, while I had very rarely gone to Alexandria, I have eaten at this specific Chipotle. Specifically, after I did an archaeological dig with Alexandria Archaeology up here, up on the Masonic Hill, and I was hungry afterwards, and so I went and parked over here, and I walked to the Chipotle, and I ate something here. And so I literally ate at where this mummy... I love fun coincidences, and that just cracked me up when I found out that there was a Chipotle, that the only Chipotle... Actually, at that time, it was the only restaurant I had actually eaten in Alexandria, was this Chipotle. Obviously, this does not look like the historical building. I can't confirm if it is or not. I wasn't able to do any research on like building codes or like old codes to see if this actually was the building. I don't think it is. Just based off looks, it looks much later. And I wasn't able to find any pictures or of what the original tavern looked like. And I also, unfortunately, the Indian Queen was an extremely common name for taverns all up and down the East Coast. So it's very hard to do research when you have to make sure that you're talking about the right one. And if I remember correctly, John Wise owned another tavern called the Indian Queen Tavern in Maryland. So it's very hard for me to do research on this tavern. But I found some really juicy stuff, which I'm going to show you next. What was I going to say? So little is known about the Indian Queen Tavern. Through my research, the earliest surviving newspaper evidence of this tavern is 1797. And the latest is 1833. So not shortly after the mummy was there, it was not. It either went under or was changed. The name was changed or something. And as I just showed y'all, the current location of the Alexandria Archaeology Museum is just down the road. So I won't show you the actual next slide because we're gonna look at the timeline of the Indian Queen Tavern. But quickly, here are some of the traveling shows that we're gonna talk about at the Queen Tavern. Lions, a perpetual fire machine, a gigantic hog, wax figures, a peprotomia, singing birds, and a dog named Don Carlo, glassworking, the living skeleton, a microscope, snakes, and even more snakes. And I will go into greater detail here. So this is one of the documents that I created for this project. I created a timeline of all of the instances I found of the Indian Queen Tavern. So here I'll just go into more detail of all these fun things. But there also, I will say, this is where the antiquated language comes in, and so like slight trigger warnings for antiquated language, for some talks about slavery in America, because slavery was still prominent. Virginia was technically in the South. And also some triggers for the exploitation of humans with disabilities and minorities. We'll say that. We'll say that. I'm trying to think of the best way to the best and also worst way of saying it. So again, it was owned by a man named John Wise, and then later by his daughter, which was pretty cool that a female owned this tavern. She didn't run the tavern. Many of these taverns would be leased out to tavern keepers, and they could sign long or short leases, and for about 10 the longest being about 10 years, and then they could break it if they found somebody else. So the Indian Queen was known previously as the Red Lion Tavern. So the earliest we have evidence of this tavern is 1797. The Times in Alexandria advertised that Amos Durgo is the proprietor of, again, this is the Red Lion Tavern. Most of these articles are a little bit boring, and they're just all about the people advertising that they had become the proprietor of this place. So this is that McGuire and Reno are the proprietor, and this is when we have indication that it was changed to the Indian Queen, and so that's in October of 1797. In 1803, so there's a pretty big jump, we have a man named Mr. Elliot of Richmond, and he is going to be displayed his work as a magician. I forgot to actually list that. We have a magician who came to display his magic in the tavern. Typically, these taverns would have like a back room, and that's most likely where some of these exhibitions, quote unquote exhibitions, would take place. And here you can see this article from 1811. It published a reward for a slave who escaped from Kentucky. It said a man named James Gillott was going to be staying at the Indian Queen, and if anybody had found the slave who escaped, his name was Dandridge. I hope he did escape. I really hope this man escaped and was able to get the freedom that he deserved. But yes, this was something common to advertise in the paper if a slave escaped from you during this time period. In 1812, they published that the Indian Queen is now being kept by a man named James Sethlar. In 1816, they published that an African lion and lioness would be on display in the tavern for a week. It says specifically, an African lion and lioness, the first and only pair that was ever in this country, which would be so interesting to find out if this is the first lion and lioness that have ever been in America, because obviously they are not native to the area. They were there Tuesday and Wednesday, and it says no apprehensions of danger need be entertained as they are secured beyond the possibility of escaping, which makes me extremely sad because they were probably in very, very tiny cages with lots of chains. That just makes me so sad thinking of that. Here you can, in 1817, the perpetual fire machine and a new patent tinderbox would be on display. Also with an elegant saddle horse. So it's literally like, this is not just, we're not talking about like the quote unquote typical freak shows that were kind of traveling America at this time. We're actually talking about like inventions, which is really something I didn't think about, but a lot of, not circuses specifically, but we do have like we're getting closer to the time period of like the World's Fair, and the World's Fair are things that were exhibitions of new technology, which is kind of crazy. You're not a landowning white man? Chains for you. Yeah, the past can be fun, but a lot of stuff in the past is real messed up. And you are right, Charlie's Dragon. Not a lot was left in the past. So then in 1818, James Sethlar sold a lease of the tavern, including all the household, the kitchen, the furniture, and all the servants, which is insane to me that they are called servants when I'm pretty sure they might be slaves. Or if they're selling, like if they're servants and they're getting paid, they're saying that the servants will continue to work even with a new owner, or a new keeper, not an owner. So this is a really cool one. This is published at the Winchester and Alexandria Stagecoach will stop at the Indian Queen before going to the City Hotel in Washington, D.C. And look at this little tiny image of a stagecoach. It's so cute. Sorry, I'm wanting to make sure that this is like all zoomed in, that you guys can see this. As lately as 60 years ago, while a woman might not own a business, she would find it very difficult. Yeah. This forced my grandmother from recent widowhood to a bad marriage because no one would buy. Wow, that's crazy. And yeah, so I don't know if you noticed, a woman, Catherine McCree, John Wise's daughter, owned this tavern for probably the majority of the history that I'm talking about. Even though she wasn't the tavern keeper, who was like pretty much the manager who would be working on it. So it was really amazing to think that like a woman was still owning this. And it looks like she never, or no, it does look like she got married, but I think she might have been a widow, who owned this place. And there are some later articles that mention her trying to sell it and find new keepers. But yeah, I mean, there are still places in the world where women can't own land and stuff. But I know there's like, I've been learning so many weird fun facts about like history with my new job. Widows, like, yeah, so as Charlie's Dragon, widows had more rights, and so like widows you could put on a tax record, like they could pay taxes and such. I also found out this amazing fact that when you're writing a will in like, we're probably talking 1800s, if you were writing a will and you didn't want to give two of your heirs anything, but you also didn't want them to contest the will, you would give them $1 or like 50 cents. So I was looking at a will and it says, I give my son $1, I give my other son $1, and he gave everything to his son-in-law, not his two blood sons. And I had to ask my boss, I was like, what is that about? And she goes, oh, it's so they don't contest the will. So they can't contest it saying my dad gave me nothing in my will, because he did. He only gave him $1. And it was just like absolutely shocking to me that I'm like, wow, this guy's stone cold, only giving his two actual biological children $1 and giving his son-in-law, like, which also son-in-law didn't actually mean son-in-law. It could have meant like adoptive son, stepson. And this son-in-law at the time was probably only about 13 years old. True. Yeah. I'm gonna bake some briars so you guys pray. Yeah. So yeah, this is really cool. So this stagecoach that would pick up people stopped at the Indian Queen before going on to DC, which is cool, really, really cool. I love, this is one of my favorites. A bright bay mare and a dark brown were just found. Were just found and and so they were left in the stables by two men, and so they said, if you lost your two horses, come by to the Indian Queen Tavern, which I think is hysterical. So Thomas Triplett apparently then owned it, and he was selling all of his household and kitchen furniture, as well as 180 acres of land. Obviously not at the tavern, but something happened to Thomas Triplett. He lost a lot. He I don't know what happened, but I think he needed money. A Jane Triplett opened the tavern for business again. And then here's the ad to rent the tavern from Catherine McCree. So here she is. So then it's under the patronage of Charles L. Sears. And then I love this. His bar shall always be stocked with the best of liquors, his table furnished with the best of market affords. From a determination to keep quiet and orderly house, he hopes to share a part of the public patronage. Advertising how it's going to be like real great. The mindset was more of the household as an entity, I think. The head of the household was the husband, yeah. We're under their father's household, but widows took over. No, yeah, for sure. For absolutely sure. I actually also found out that there was a thing that was not exactly divorce, but it was a separation. In this really early time period, you could do a separation where like the court agreed that like you're not getting an annulment and you're not getting a divorce, but you're allowed to live separately and you're allowed to pay your own taxes separately. And so even though like on later censuses you might see that they live together, you'll see that via tax records that they could actually own different things, that like the woman would own all of the like horses or something, and that's purely like you don't like the person, but like you can't get like a full divorce and like he'll still support her, and it's like part of the will. It's like this crazy weird loophole thing. Then we got Eli Legg. $130 and $130 per year to live at this tavern, which is really cool. So then we get into more displays of the freak shows and the exhibitions. We're going to call them exhibitions and not freak shows, because not all of them are weird. So this one is a gigantic hog. So apparently a 800-pound hog was raised in Alexandria County by Mr. Caleb Richards, and so it went on display in the back of this tavern. Again, admittance 25 cents, children half price. Catherine McCree was looking for renters. Falwell L. Perry became the new tavern keeper. This is one of my favorites because I just wish that there were photos of this. I wish there was something. A museum of wax figures. The citizens... That's fine, Chef Thomas. Yeah, no, for sure. For sure. No more weird... I mean, yeah, no more weirder than a giant pumpkin. But yeah, the hog, the 800 pound... Like, I don't know how much hogs weigh. I think 800 pounds might be an exaggeration. So this one is, the citizens of Alexandria and its vicinity are respectively informed that on Thursday, the 22nd of December, this is 1825, will commence the exhibition at the Indian Queen Tavern of an elegant collection of wax figures of the following characters: General Lafayette, Washington, and Hamilton. And more. There's also, it says, etc., etc. Somebody in the 1820s created wax figures of President Washington and Alexander Hamilton. Which honestly, is Alexander Hamilton even... When did Alexander Hamilton die? When did he die? He died in 1804. Okay, so he's been long dead. He's been dead for 20 years. But that's like hysterical to me, and I bet they looked terrifying. I bet they looked so bad, and I hate to say it, but like I bet they looked really scary. And I just wish we could see them. I wish we could see them. But yeah, that's insanely cool to me. So this is a constable's sale for all the right, title, and interest, which implies that maybe Catherine McCrea didn't have enough money. And if it's a constable sale, I suspect that, like, she might owe debt or something. I don't know. But it's not great. This doesn't seem great that the whole thing is getting sold. In May 2nd, it published that the tavern was to let. And then we get to this weird thing, which I don't know how to say. I've tried so many times and I don't know how to say it. I believe it is Paprotomia, which made me think instantly that it's about Egypt. It's not. This is a gallery of cuttings and portraits of distinguished individuals, flowers, tree, military, sporting, and architectural subjects. Of like paper cuttings, I guess, which I think it might be like cameos, I guess, of people, and I don't know what it is. It's a little vague, but I love this advertisement at the bottom. Correct likenesses, cut in a few seconds without drawing or machine, by sight alone, and simply a pair of common scissors, by a young gentleman who possesses the faculty of delineating every object in the same extraordinary manner. Likenesses taken in bust, 25 cents. Figures of whole length, $1.25. Likenesses in bronze, from 50 cents and upwards. And then at the very, very bottom it says, gentlemen wishing for portraits of horses or dogs are requested to call early. And I don't know if this is just dating myself. I don't think it really is. There used to be a really cool toy store when I was a really little kid. And one day we went to the toy store because my mom wanted to get paper cameos of me and my brother done. And I think they're called cameos. I'm not 100% sure, but these were black paper where a woman sat there and looked at us and wrote our and cut out our profile and then framed it in little frames. And I'm really curious where those are in our house because I know one of the frames broke, but I think that's literally what this is. And it's really interesting and weird. Then we have this one from 1828, The Wonderful Birds of Knowledge, Romeo, Tipo Siab, and Fairy. This one, unfortunately, is so blurry. It's so hard for me to read it. But I believe they are singing birds. And then there is a dog named, Dominoes with Don Carlo, who is, I don't know what that means. Dominoes with Don Carlo. And then the French magical dancing Lilliputians, or animated figures. And then the figures are also for sale, so you can just purchase them. And I'm like so confused. I need to look at this article in more detail, but it's so hard because it's the only version I have is very blurry, so it's hard to read. So then we get to January 8th when the mummy comes. So after the mummy came, we had a glassworking and spinning exhibition where you could buy ornaments, which is here. Then it looks like Catherine didn't actually fully lose the tavern, but it was to rent in 1830. And then we get to the one really sad one. Lilliputians, like the small folk in... Oh, is that what that is? Thank you, Charlie's Dragon. I don't know Gulliver's Travel that well. That's what they are. I wonder if it says... Does it say Gulliver? It doesn't look like it does. Wow, thanks for that. That opens up a little thing. That opens up a lot. All right, this is the unfortunately sad one. This makes me sad. For 3 days only, the wonderful curiosity exhibiting at the Indian Queen Hotel, corner of King and St. Asaph Street, Mr. Calvidson, the living skeleton. So this man, this extraordinary man was born in Stafford, Connecticut, and is 42 years old, 5'3", and weighs 58 pounds. His weight was formerly 135 pounds. He has gradually been losing his flesh for the last 16 years without any apparent disease, having enjoyed perfect health and appetite, eats, drinks, and sleeps as well as any man, can walk, dance, ride on horseback, His bodily strength is not so much impaired, but that he can lift 200 pounds. His mental powers are not at all diminished. He was a soldier in the last war and was at the Battle of Plattenberg, and one of the brave men who valiantly volunteered to take up the planks from the bridge to prevent the passage of the enemy. He slept on the ground the night after the battle and was chilled and benumbed with cold, since which time he has been gradually losing his flesh until it is all gone, and nothing left but skin and bones. He is lively, fond of jokes and company. All who have ever seen him pronounce him the greatest human curiosity exhibited. He has been visited by many physicians and scientific men, but none of them pretend to account for his extraordinary appearance. He has exhibited at Boston, Albany, New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore, where he last met with a very liberal patronage of the public and has been visited by many of the first families, particularly ladies and children. So yeah, so this guy was really, really, really skinny and apparently still very nice and very happy, and he was on display. And it makes me sad because we don't know truly what happened to him. We don't know. I would probably write a whole paper about Mr. Calvinson if I could find more newspaper articles about him. But it seems like he fought if it was the last war, I think that has to be 1830. Does that have to be the Revolutionary War? If he was 42 years old? He would be too young to... When's the Civil War? I never remember when the Civil War is. I thought the Civil War... I don't know. That's 16 years. He was 30. Oh, it probably was War of 1812. That actually might be the War of 1812. Yeah, so this is before Civil War. That's what I thought. So yeah, he must have fought in the War of 1812 because... Yeah, it must have been 1812 because it couldn't have been Revolutionary War because that was over in 1885. Which I know now because I work in a place where I have to know these things. So yeah, 1812 makes sense. And if I looked up like Plattenberg, I probably could find out. So then we have a celebrated solar microscope with a diamond lens. It can only be used when the sun is unobscured by clouds. So it does warn you that if there are clouds, you won't be able to look at it, which is hysterically funny. And then we have the snakes of the anaconda. Mexican-American War. Yeah, this was published in 1830, so it couldn't have been the Mexican-American War, so it would have had to be the War of 1812. So this published that the great serpents of India would be on exhibit. They would present a group of Asiatic serpents, an ocelot, an alligator, and the heads of 2 New Zealand chiefs. So that's also great. And then it says one of the serpents will be fed with live fowl in front of guests. And then, not even joking you, 3 days later, they have this short little article, which says one of the serpents is now being exhibited at the Old Indian Queen Tavern, produced yesterday upwards of 50 young ones at a birth, in consequence of which the exhibition will be continued this day. So apparently the snake gave birth to 50 babies, and so they continued the exhibition for another day. And then in December 17th in 1833, it looks like Catherine Bronner could be Catherine McCree, just with a new married name. It seems that she is looking to sell the Indian Queen, and that is the last we hear of her. So we don't know if the Indian Queen was sold to become another tavern. We don't know if it was sold and the building was torn down. Like, really, we don't know what happened to the building after that. So I hope y'all enjoyed that little side quest into early American history and traveling shows. But this tavern saw a lot. This tavern the Mummy was not... You enjoyed that, Charlie's Dragon? I love this part. This is like one of the parts that I did not expect to do any research on, but as soon as I found out more, I just kept digging. I kept digging to see if I could find more information about what was on display at this tavern, and this has become a kind of a new research interest of mine. But yeah, So that's just one of the cool things that that happened during along with the mummy. The mummy was kind of smack dab in the middle of when all of these shows were at the Indian Queen Tavern. So, after Alexandria, Captain Turner's mummy moved to 3 hotels in Washington, D.C., one of which was also owned by John Wise. That's called the National Hotel, which you can see here. It then moved on back to Pennsylvania to private homes in Williamsport, Muncie, and Milton. This was in May of 1829. And it literally went to private homes. The newspaper articles are pretty funny from this time period that are like, yeah, it's just going to go on display in this guy's house. And I'm like, oh my God, that is hysterical. Why would you, why? So then it traveled back to Lambden's museum in January of 1830. This is a picture of Joseph Lambden, who owned, what was the museum called again? The Museum of Natural History and Gallery of Fine Arts in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So it traveled back there in January of 1830, and then it might have been displayed at the Washington Museum in Baltimore in July of 1830, but with no description, no stereotype plate, and no indication that it was, I believe that's this article. Or no, that's Milton, sorry. With no indication that it is Captain Turner's mummy, we don't know which mummy it is. So, after 1830, no more newspaper articles have been found explicitly mentioning Captain Turner's mummy or a printing of the stereotype plate of the mummy. But I said S.F. Wolf? Oh my God, I said this wrong in the presentation. S.J. Wolf, a historian who has conducted research on multiple Egyptian mummies, speculates that a mummy purchased by a man named John Scudder, which you can see here, he purchased this in January 1832. She speculates that this is Captain Turner's mummy. So unfortunately, all of this is just based off of theory, based off timing and everything. So one portion of it is this mummy went missing after 1830. We don't know what happened to it after 1830. So this is kind of a little bit more speculation that I don't really like to speculate, but it's going to be the closest we're going to get to finding out what possibly happened to this mummy and why it is continually further missing. It's the only thing that gives us a semi-answer, unfortunately. So this new purchase was advertised almost daily in the Evening Post for nearly 2 months. So every day in the Evening Post of New York City's newspaper, John Scudder was advertising this little advertisement saying, "This day added, the Egyptian mummy recently received from Thebes in Egypt. It is a great curiosity and well worth the attention of every man of science and discernment. This mummy was taken from one of the most remarkable catacombs and is considered to be very old. It is enclosed in its sarcophagus or coffin ornamented with numerous hieroglyphics." I will also mention, if you didn't notice, this is almost exactly what they said several news articles ago when they mentioned that it was newly received from Egypt. Obviously, it is now, what year is it? It's now 1832. It has been here for over 10 years. It is not newly received from Egypt. That was a lie that was done so frequently with these mummies to entice people to come and visit and to see the mummy, because it is newly arrived from Egypt. It has never been seen before. It's totally a marketing ploy. Wolf believes that this is probably Captain Turner's mummy, as there is no evidence of a newly arrived mummy at the time, and this text almost, especially the taken from the remarkable catacombs, this almost matches the same text that we obviously read before. So by this time in 1832, there were several mummies being displayed in many museums, including in New York City. So he was just competing to try to make his American museum the most popular. Now, this is where the story gets a little interesting. If the mummy was purchased by John Scudder for his American museum, and it was never sold or never left John Scudder's American museum, the ultimate fate of the mummy lies in the illustrious hands of P.T. Barnum himself. Yes, I am talking about Barnum and Bailey, P.T. Barnum, Hugh Jackman. This is who we're talking about. So, in 1941, so we jump ahead another 9 years, John Scudder's museum, American Museum, was failing. And P.T. Barnum purchased the building and the entire natural history collection to begin his entire career in museums. So this is before P.T. Barnum had a circus. This is before everything. This is literally, if y'all have seen The Greatest Showman, if you've seen The Greatest Showman, this is literally the beginning of The Greatest Showman. He purchased a museum called the American Museum and renamed it Barnum's American Museum. Yes. I sense you now get the drift of where the story is unfortunately going. Yes, he did start off in exhibitions. This is an image of Barnum's museum. This image dates much later, though, because of what we will talk about. So he purchased it in 1841, and he opened his version of Barnum's American Museum on January 1st, 1842. And it was the premier attraction in New York City by 1850. I love the music from The Greatest Showman because it's just well written music, well performed music. But I don't like how it completely and utterly ignores the exploitation, and it glorifies P.T. Barnum and all of this other stuff. I don't like how they made a romantic relationship with him and the woman, because I can't remember her name. She's a real woman. She had a beautiful opera singer voice, because that was not true and whatever. And for someone not having a cultural connection to him, the fact that someone, yeah, exactly. It's not it should not be a feel-good movie. It should not. But I can't deny that the music is good. I can't deny it. The music is very good. But so unlike kind of how the movie portrayed it, like, yeah, people didn't really like it, but it actually was a very popular attraction. His museum was actually very well received in certain circles. It's not, the movie kind of makes it seem like everybody hated it, but like Barnum was doing okay. Like he wasn't having that much trouble, which is why also I don't like the movie, that it just completely like negates like what's actually happening. So there are some conflicting reports that cite that Barnum had either 1 or 3 Egyptian mummies in his collection at the time. Oh, I will also mention this. The movie itself shows, honestly, that his museum was more of a performing site, which is not what it was. It was an actual museum where you walked around. It was a natural history museum. He didn't get into any of the sort of like performers or actors until he kind of did the circus run, with the exception of Tiny Tim, who was a real person and was a little person who he probably definitely exploited. I think he was quote unquote on display. I don't know what that exactly means, if if that person just sat there the whole time, like in this exhibit, or if there was a stage. Like, I don't really know the specifics of it. But he purchased the full natural history museum that Scudder had made. And Scudder had collected a lot of stuff. So this was not just the kind of a performing, quote unquote, freak show. This was technically a good museum, with the exception of exploitation of actual live human beings. So here is the evidence that we have of possibly Captain Turner's mummy or any of the mummies in Barnum's collection. So we only have 3 images available, and unfortunately none of them exactly match Captain Turner's mummy. 2 images clearly depict a partially unwrapped mummy in the lower half of a sarcophagus. It's unclear if these 2, this image here and this image, it's unclear if they're supposed to represent the same image, mainly because of the square case on this one and the circular case on this one. I think they probably represent the same thing, mainly because of the wrappings and where the portion of the mummy is unwrapped. I think they're probably the same image. And as you can see, this thing says that in number 803, so in the 803rd case, there was an Egyptian mummy from Thebes, 3,000 years old, enclosed in a case of sycamore wood, and then along with these other items. It's hard to say, but it does give the basic description of Captain Turner's mummy. The 3,000 years old, the sycamore wood are 2 details that are pretty much read in every single article about Captain Turner's mummy. So that's a possibility. But it's hard because the tops are different and the wrapping pattern is technically different. But again, are they going for accuracy? Are they going for this? Probably not. So who knows? This last image depicts the 6th salon of Barnum's museum, with 2 guests over here looking at an upright sarcophagus. It's really hard to determine what this is. This does not look like an open sarcophagus. This looks like they are staring at the front portion of a sarcophagus, and unfortunately all you can really tell is that there's a circular top, there's a little human with a little mask, possibly their arms crossed above their chest, and then that could possibly be wrappings. This to me does not look like a mummified person, but looks like the front of a sarcophagus. So again, hard to tell. And also this image could totally be made up. Could 100% be made up. There's no indication that this was drawn from life. We don't know. And sadly, we unfortunately will never know, because on July 13th, 1865, P.T. Barnum's American Museum burnt to the ground. This is obviously a recreation image of the museum burning, but this is a real news article called "The Great Conflagration in New York, Barnum's Museum on Fire. It will probably be a total loss." Yeah, big F in the chat for the museum. So again, it burned to the ground on July 13th, 1865. So supposedly the mummy the mummy was purchased by Scudder in 1832. P.T. Barnum purchased the museum in 1841. So supposedly this mummy went on display here for, what are we going on? I'm very bad at math. About 30 years or so. Supposedly. Again, we're totally making assumptions that this is the same mummy. The New York Times wrote that the mummies are gone and though they may have walked with Moses, or danced with Miriam, or feasted with Pharaoh, or supped with the earliest descendants of the persecuted Ham, they are no longer preserved, but powdered mummies, and the sacred dust of Egypt now mingles with the dirt of Broadway and the cinder of Barnum's. So yeah, that's I love that quote so much because it's very similar to the poem. So Barnum attempted to, I know, isn't that crazy? That's like absolutely crazy to think that like you would look at the ashes and you might be able to find like like an ancient Egyptian bone. Like that's something straight out of like Bones or something out of like some crazy like crime show where they're like, oh no, we found this body, and then they test it and they're like, why is this body thousands of years old? I literally think there is an episode of Bones like that. So Barnum attempted to reopen his museum, but guess what? It burnt down again in 1868. And at that point, is when he opened his traveling circus. So this is thus the end of the story of Captain Larkin Turner's mummy, unfortunately. Man needs to get some sprinklers. Yes. There was also speculation that the fire was purposely started. I think we do have evidence that the fire started in, where it started in one of the offices. It didn't start anywhere else. It started in like the office, like on the first floor or in the basement or something. But yeah, he definitely should have taken a hint, because it definitely needed to be helpful. So very quickly, because I would rather go through the full timeline of the mummy, but very quickly, let me just talk about some of the analysis of the dating of the coffin. And I will tell y'all a quick little story about this particular project and why it means so much to me. So again, as I mentioned, I worked in this project the summer of 2019 when I worked at the, when I was an intern at the Archaeology Museum. The next, after I completed it, we never had time to do an exhibition. I gave them all my research and they were like, thanks so much, we'll see what happens. And I told them, please keep me in the loop. I would love to continue to work on this if you do plan on doing an exhibition. I go back to Memphis. I start my second year as grad school, and I took a course in museum studies. And this course, we had a kind of almost semester-long project where we were learning how to write a mock museum grant. And so we were learning what it takes to write a grant, and we were writing a mock grant. My professor was a little confused, and so she actually thought that like some of the grants we were actually gonna use and apply for. So she asked people to like go out and find things that we could write grants for, but it kind of turned out into a disaster because why would you want your students to go out and ask museums saying, hey, love your museum, but like this exhibit looks really ugly. Can I write a grant so that it will make it look better? Like, it was kind of a stupid way of going about it. But I decided that I was going to write a mock grant for the exhibition that we had already planned on. So that entire semester, I continued to do my research with now my new access to my Egyptology library at my university. And I wrote about a 30-page paper that was my research paper that went into this grant as kind of a support as to why this grant, this quote-unquote grant, should be accepted and why this exhibition should go forward. Like the context and the importance of why this grant should be accepted and such. So that is how I actually was able to compile all this research that I had just spent like 4 months doing into a full-blown paper. And one of the portions that I wanted to tackle that I didn't have time to tackle when I was as an intern is I wanted to translate the hieroglyphs. Now I am not stupid. I know that I am not qualified to translate hieroglyphs like extensively. But I know that I could try my darndest and that I had a professor that possibly would help me. So I tried my darndest. But as you'll see, this coffin dates around the 22nd dynasty, so we're talking kind of late period. Third intermediate period to late period. And that time period isn't exactly still, it does use Middle Egyptian, but it's like Middle Egyptian's going out of style. So there's lots of problems with it. And then as we discussed, this drawing is all I have, and these hieroglyphs were not properly written. So some of them, it is extremely hard to figure out what it actually is saying. So while I was doing this research, I did discuss it with my professor. I asked to have a meeting. I actually had a meeting with 2 of my professors. I had a meeting with one professor to ask her about iconography, to help me and to lead me in the right direction. And then I went to my language professor to ask him with help with the translation and give me some advice. I did. I got pretty good advice from both of those. I didn't get the best. I didn't get everything I wanted from it, but I was fine with it. I was happy with what I got, and that I had to find the rest of the research. So then I had to... So then this was around December when I finished this paper, December 2018. So December 2019. So when I finished this, I was extremely proud of this. This was a project that I could continually do research on and I would never get bored. And I was extremely, extremely proud of this. So much so that I considered switching my entire thesis topic to be this paper about this mummy. And I sometimes wish I did, and sometimes I'm glad I didn't. One of the things that I was so confident about is that I wanted to try to present this as a poster at the American Center in Egypt's annual meeting, which at that time was going to be in Toronto. And I was very nervous. I never really thought I would ever want to present a poster or anything, just because I'm not the best in front of people sometimes. Sometimes I get pretty bad stage fright. But I wanted to try. At my school, if you wanted to do any poster, you had to get approval from your professors. So I sought approval. And I was rejected. For reasons that I understand, but sometimes don't understand. The main problem that I had with the whole entire situation was that I asked only one of my professors. She ended up showing the paper to another one of the professors, and then they put all of these corrections and kind of told me that certain parts of the paper, mainly the hieroglyphic translation, which I had discussed with that professor already, was not up to par, was not great, and not good. And the biggest problem I had with it is that they did not try to help me. They said, nope, you can't submit this, and that's that. I had about a month before I had to submit just an abstract to be in it. Yeah, I knew it wasn't great. I knew that part wasn't fine. And it hurts me because I'm looking at the folder and I have the document here that they gave back to me. Like this is the document that they printed out for me with all of the comments, and I guess this is stupid because I didn't realize. So that professor was my thesis professor. He writes horrible comments, like in really mean ways. Like this one says, "Beetles don't have talons, they have feet." Like he just says it in such like a rude way. Yeah, so I cried a lot. All of this crap, all of this writing. Yeah. So all I really was just mostly upset for is that they didn't help me. They didn't continue to help me. They didn't encourage me. They just said, nope, you can't do it. And that's it. So I was very bummed, and it hurt a lot because I was so proud of this project. And at that moment, that was when I decided that I don't want to get a PhD, because professors are supposed to help you and they are supposed to encourage you, and that's not what happened. So that moment, I said, I had very vivid memories of giving a big middle finger up to academia, because that was when I realized that it's also when I realized that they only cared about themselves, because they were caring about how this would be a representation of their exhibit, or of their university. Thank you, Haley. Yes, it's a tough subject for me, but I'm very glad that I think I have moved past it to accept that this is still the best project I've ever done, and I don't care. But what also happened is that I still wanted to present this. I had planned to both try to present this as a poster and in this student symposium that we had already planned. So when it came to, I totally avoided it. I totally avoided trying to do anything for the student symposium. Thanks. And see, that's why I thought, oh my God, I could go on a rant on this for like hours. That's why I thought this project would be perfect, because it is so different. And the American Research Center in Egypt is a good portion. I would say maybe we're going 25% of the people who attend it and the members are actual academics. But a lot of the people are just, I hate to say it, they're just old people who really like ancient Egypt and they just want to come and learn. And they don't get a lot of the cool things. They don't get like a lot of these really detailed analyses and like art history things. Like, they don't get those things. The things that they like are things like this. And so I thought I really like had it catered for like this particular portion of everything, which is why I was just so mad that they just like didn't accept it. And it just made more sense that they don't, academia in a certain extent doesn't care about the outside population. And that's what I don't like about academia. But I did end up presenting this, obviously, at my student symposium. But I remember I was having panic attack after panic attack, because obviously I couldn't present the translations I had for this text because they weren't right. But I refused to look at it, because every time I looked at it, I was sent into like a full panic attack. And so luckily I made a meeting with the professor who rejected the whole thing, and I was like, what do I do? Because I can't talk about like half of the research I did. And she pretty much was just like, just touch on it, just slightly. And I said, okay, fine, we'll do that. And I still think I kind of stole the show. I was the last one to present my paper. I think people really liked it. I hope they did, but I think mine was the most interesting, to be honest. So yeah, sorry for that whole rant, but this just proves that this piece of research was just so iconic in my own kind of personal history with Egyptology and academia and such. But moving on. Now only one Egyptologist has really looked at this and kind of given a dating based off of the image of it. And this was John Taylor, who is a curator at the British Museum, and a friend of S.J. Wolfe. And so S.J. Wolfe, thank you so much, Interplanetary Iguanas. Thank you so much for your great questions and comments. We should be doing a lecture every other Saturday, so come on by or join the Discord to see if when I have them. It should be, I'm trying to do every other Saturday, but we'll see how the rest of the month of October goes. But have a very, very good night, Interplanetary Iguanas. What a great name. What a great username. So John Taylor wrote in the appendix of the Mummies in 19th Century America that on a very basic analysis, he believed that this dates to the 22nd dynasty, mainly because there are no arms or hands shown. There's a stole painted on the collar, and there's a simple decoration of the lid, winged rammed head scarab, beetle with a single column of inscription. So this is dates to the third intermediate. So 22nd dynasty is in the third intermediate period. Coffins from this period frequently did not have any arms, hands, or elbows. Frequently you'll see either wooden hands like tacked on, or you'll see like the shape of the pointy elbows, but this one has absolutely no indication that it has any arms. So this is identified as a stola coffin because of those two bars on the chest called mummy braces, and they're otherwise are called stola, and so that's why this has been identified as a stola coffin. So the sarcophagus has the coffin has no beard on it, and it wears a vulture headdress on its face, which would indicate that this mummy was a female, or at least the sarcophagus was made for a woman. So they always identified that the mummy was a woman in all of the newspaper articles, but it's unclear if they... I mean, only her face, arm, and foot were unwrapped, so unless it was very obviously a woman, she had hair or something, that could have been. And then the other thing is that frequently they would mix and match coffins and mummies sometimes. So sometimes they won't be exactly the same mummy found in the same coffin. So this is the translation. Yeah, very true. A reused coffin is very true. The reuse of coffins is pretty common in antiquity, so it seems like that is always possible. But there was also the exception that, like, during the 1800s, when they were doing the mummy trade, that they would find empty coffins and they would find an abandoned mummy with no coffin and then place it together. So sometimes it's hard to tell which exchange of mummy and coffins occurred, if it was a reuse of a coffin in antiquity or if it was a mix and match coffin from modern times. So this is John Taylor's if it fits, it sits. Yeah, exactly. Exactly, Charlie's Dragon. So this is what John Taylor translated. I will say it's not too far different from what I translated. I'm actually curious what I wrote in this paper. What was my final translation? Oh my god, I literally am looking through this. I'm trying to figure out what all these checks and X's are that I obviously did in here. So what did I translate this as? John Taylor translates this as, oh yeah, 100% Chef Thomas. That's my body, yeah, no. I think it'd be absolutely confusing for all of the poor little Baas trying to get back to their bodies. So John Taylor translates this as an offering which the king gives to Re-Herakti, the great god, lord of heaven, to Atum, ... and to Anubis, lord of the sacred land, that they might give ... possessions ... alabaster jars and clothing to Osiris, Jed Khonsu EU F Ankh, or Jed Khonsu EU S Ankh, true of voice. So obviously that is a name at the very end of it. Typically when you see Osiris in front of the name, usually that means it's a male, so that's why that's very interesting there. But the main difference here is this portion right here. So the EUF, the F right here is the male pronoun, and the S here is the female pronoun. So John Taylor, when he translated this, could not tell if we were talking about a man or a woman. This name means, may Khonsu say, he/she shall live, is what that person's name means. But it is unclear if it's a he or a she. Because literally, and I will say, Jed Khonsu EUS Ankh and Jed Khonsu EUF Ankh are both very popular names for the third intermediate period, so it's not like, oh, this name is only used for men, or this name is only, like, this is a fully gender neutral name as long as you change that one letter. So I mean, I did not change this very much. I just said an offering that the king gave, and that is more of a grammatical thing. There was a paper that confirmed that all of these offering formulas have to be in the past tense. So when John Taylor originally wrote this, that paper had not come out yet. So I had written an offering that the king gave, and Re Herakti, Lord of the Sky, Atum, Lord of the Two Lands, dwelling in Heliopolis, and Anubis, Lord of the Necropolis, that they might give offerings, alabaster jars, and clothing to Osiris, Jed Khonsu EUS, true of voice. So one of the things that I had confirmed with my meeting with him is that this name it doesn't have an Ankh. There's no Ankh at the end. So it's actually a shortened name. So the name supposedly is Jed Khonsu EUS or EUF, depending on which gender we're talking about. But there is evidence that he was able to look up quickly in a book. Like, he had a mind that was, like, absolutely insane. He very quickly, like, pulled out a book and was like, oh, we do have evidence that this name can be shortened to Jed Khonsu EUS or EUF. So he was like, yeah, I think this is a shortened version of that full name. But we obviously knew that the full name has an Ankh at the end, so we just added to it. And at the very end, the true of voice portion is a term. What is it? It's called Ma'aheru. Ma'aheru is a word that you place after the name of a deceased individual. So, if you're telling a story about somebody, about your deceased grandma, you would say, oh yes, and my dad went and visited my grandma, Ma'aheru, and it would just say, it would just help indicate that is a deceased person. And it kind of is just saying true of voice, that they are kind of true. And there's also a different translation of it, and I can't remember for the life of me what it is. Oh, justified. Yeah, sort of like may he rest in peace. Yeah, for sure. So the other translation, an older translation of it, is justified. Technically, it's Maha-Heru. Maha is voice, and Heru is true. No. Sorry. Ma'at is true, like Ma'at's the truth or justice, and Heru is voice, so it's true of voice. But it used to be translated as justified, and it's a way to say that person has been justified, and that is he or she has made it through the afterlife, is pretty much what that kind of means. But yeah, very similar to when you say may he rest in peace after somebody's name. So yeah, my translation wasn't that different, but he ripped it apart. But yeah, these hieroglyphs were so hard to try to figure out what they all meant. It's very difficult. Let me see. Whew. All right. So yeah, so here you see this is the name at the very end, which is hard to decipher. So, as I mentioned before, I made a mock exhibition grant for this mummy. So, I decided to for this mock grant, I had to make up what the exhibit would look like, and I had to budget items that would be in the exhibit and budget display cases and lots of different stuff. Thank you, Charlie's Dragon. Yeah, honestly, looking back at the notes, like, he just didn't, I mean, the images, it's so hard. I wouldn't expect anything better from my professor because the hieroglyphs are so badly drawn. He was a jerk. He was my thesis advisor, and he was very bad to me, I have to say. Another reason why I wanted to get out of academia is because of people like him. And it was an unfortunate situation because, like, my roommate was a year younger than me in the program, and she saw, like, how awful he was to me throughout the pandemic and doing this thesis, and she had already signed up for him to be his advisor and pretty much went through the same thing with him. And it unfortunately makes me wish that I had told the head of our department that there were problems. But my mom was all like, don't burn bridges, and I just want them all to burn. I want to burn them all. But that's why I think I'm here, and that's why I'm glad that I can teach people in a way that I don't discourage people, and I let them figure it out. I find it interesting how academia aesthetics like dark academia is a thing, but several people know that has actually been involved with academia hate. So this is so interesting. So I know very little about dark academia, and like what it really is. The style of it, yeah, like the aesthetics of it, I'm very much a part of. But like academia itself, I am very much against. I've definitely slightly softened. The end of last year, like, to be honest, like, right before I started streaming, about a year ago, I was on a full-blown rampage to burn academia to the ground. Hello, Claire, welcome! I was on a full-blown rampage to burn academia to the ground. It is so elitist, it is very true. You've been lurking? Oh, I'm so glad. It's very elitist, it's very dominating, it's very about perceptions. It's so much about like how everyone is being perceived and everything. And it's just so bad. It's just and I hope to God that my experiences are exclusive to our university, but I kind of know they're not. Okay, I will say this, Haley. When I mainly mean academia, I have to say I don't really mean undergraduate academia. I mainly mean graduate academia, and even in that aspect, I don't really mean academia in certain fields. In certain fields. I mainly am talking about academia in, let's say, history fields. See, I would say white men academia, but I feel like that covers too much of what I'm talking about. I don't know how, like, say, I don't really know how, like, engineering, like graduate engineering is, or how finance or business, like, I don't really know. Like, I don't doubt that they also are elitist, but I don't doubt they're elitist in completely different ways. Mainly being, like, maybe those reasons are, like, they're not exclusive to everyone and that they don't include a lot of women in that chance. Mostly with history, I found that it's more women than men now, at least. But, the elitism I see is in these kind of history, anthropology, probably even sociology, in these social sciences that typically, this is a good way to describe it. In the fields where when you get a PhD, all you can really do is teach. That's what I mean in this. In that, in those types of fields that if you go out and get your PhD, you can't do anything but teach. Because I feel like that is the unfortunate perpetual wheel. My thesis professor, on one of our first days of taking Middle Egyptian with him, told us very explicitly that the professors at his grad school worked him to the bone, and so that he's going to do that to us too. Because that is his belief. And that is an absolutely fucked up belief. And I truly say that if I did ever become a professor and I did ever do like any sort of more professional teaching, oh my God, I would not be like that. I would like to treat all of my students with respect and understanding. I'm like, yeah. He turned out to be a little bit kinder, like our second year and our second semester we were with him. But why would you say that to another person? It just didn't make any sense. I'm low-key looking at archaeology, biology, and I don't need any more reasons to avoid college. And I will say this. I loved my undergraduate university. I loved going to school there. Granted, it wasn't... I didn't get the best archaeology education that I could have gotten, so I don't know what other universities of archaeology education, but my archaeology professor, shout out to Brad. Brad was the most supportive professor I have ever had. Literally, I had nobody like that in grad school. Nobody. Brad was the OG. So supportive, so willing to help me do anything I wanted to do. I don't know if I've told this story before, but Brad didn't come in until my junior year. And I went and studied abroad. So I was only there for like a semester. His first semester, I was only there. And he, after being introduced to me, like asked me what the problems in the anthropology department were. And I was like, you really want to know what the problems are? And granted, at this point, the problems in the anthropology department really had nothing to do with like elitism or like professors. It had to do with bad professors, just like people who just didn't know how to freaking teach you. And then truly it had to do with the university not offering the right courses that we needed to count. That was truly what the main problem was, and like a lack of courses that were taught. It really had nothing to do with like the exact professors, except this one professor who just didn't know how to teach. And he asked me to send him an email with all of the problems in the anthropology department. And I was like, are you serious? And he was like, yeah. And so what did I do? I sent him a really long email with all the problems in the anthropology department. And I think he's fixed a couple of them because of what I said. And he would tell me, you are the change in the department. You are going to help me change this department for the good. And I was like, I can't even believe you're a real human being right now. He also, I think he definitely, like, I will say, my senior thesis was on an ancient Egyptian. What happened to the music? There it is. Never mind. We're back. He may have inflated my ego slightly when it came to my knowledge of Egyptology. Because I wrote my senior thesis on an archaeological site in Egypt on Amarna. But I had absolutely no access to any good Egyptology books. I was probably using hella old books. I And he couldn't correct me on anything. He could only correct me on grammar. He would always like say these amazing things, being like, I can't believe you thought of this as a topic, and I can't believe you like all of this analysis you're doing. It's so great. And I'm just like, in comparison to like what it would be in grad school, people would be like, that sucks. Like, I did actually have my professor tell me that my idea that what I did for my senior thesis was just not true. And I was like, fuck you. Because 2 years later, what happened? The other professor in the history department, who was a more supportive professor than any of the professors in the art history department, told me that my idea was really interesting and he would love to see if it was true. So, fuck our department. Yeah. I don't know. I can't tell if that was just our school. I feel bad that I'm totally riffing on academia, but they fucked me over. So back to where I was supposed to go to. I did this as a mock grant. So I had to do a budget, I had to do a layout, I had to do all of this thing for this mock exhibition. And so I created this. So as I mentioned way earlier ago, one of the things that I did was I created a 3D model of the entire Alexandria Archaeology Museum. And so what I did was I went back into that model that I created a couple months earlier, and I created my own little exhibition with all the things that I was going to include. So what I was going to include was I was going to get a giant cardboard cutout of our mummy, because obviously we don't have the mummy to actually display. So I was going to get a giant cardboard cutout of the mummy. I was going to have 3 iPads on 3 iPad stands. One of which would have that document with all. Well, I think what I was gonna do is I was gonna like pay a developer to create an app that had 3 main things on it. It had a map of all of the places that the mummy traveled to, which I created a Google map, which I forgot that we're gonna go look at. Then it's going to have a list and images of all of the newspaper articles that I collected for both the Indian Queen Tavern and the actual mummy being on display, with transcriptions and audio of all of the newspaper articles and all of the text, so that anybody with disabilities can listen to it or read it. And then it also is going to have a timeline of the mummy and where it went. Then I was going to rent out. We were going to get on loan the one example of the mummy pamphlet from the University of Virginia Special Collection Library. So that would be our one like artifact that we would have, and we would have this little book stand so that it would just sit right there. We'd have a big map of all the different places it went. We would have a fun activity of because Alexandria Archaeology Museum, they have interactive activities all over the museum, so that little kids can do stuff and make stuff. And so my interactive activity was going to be, I think it was going to be writing your name in hieroglyphs. I think that's what it was going to have. Yeah, I can't remember now. And then the other thing that we were going to have is text panels that talk both about ancient Egypt and mummification practices, but text panels about what Alexandria was in the 1800s, because obviously we're talking about this mummy. We're talking about the coinciding of this mummy, an ancient Egyptian artifact, and early 19th century America. And so what I would have is I would go through the collection of the Alexandria Archaeology Museum, and I would pull out artifacts that would have been seen in taverns. So I have little jugs, I have pipes, and I would have just had a little miniature exhibition of some of the objects that you would have seen in a tavern, like the Indian Queen. Yeah. So this is one of the things I was most proud of the grant, just because I thought it was really cool. And I did send the mock paper. I did send the whole paper to people at Alexandria. I'm actually considering emailing them and seeing if they're interested in and maybe honestly applying for a grant to get money to do this exhibition. They have a very small space. So this is obviously a mock grant. So this was like, this space is so much bigger than it would actually be. It would have to be something so much smaller. But I think it would be cool. And I will admit that the main archaeologist who discovered the newspaper article, he wanted to do a spooky exhibition. He wanted it to all be about Halloween time that they would put on this exhibition, which is fine. But I don't like it. I don't like associating mummies with spooky stuff. Obviously they are, and I'm not going to be able to fight every person who's like, oh, mummies and Halloween and stuff. But I was hoping to avoid it. The one thing that I did like, though, is that he knew people who were historical costumers, and the one thing he proposed that would be very cool is that they would hire somebody to stand outside the museum or to stand outside the Torpedo Factory Art Center and like yell at passerby, hey, come and see the mummy upstairs, which I love because that is probably what definitely happened when the mummy was on display in these cities. It probably definitely there was some guy who was shouting in the street saying, come and see the mummy and stuff. And so that was something that I actually did approve of. I thought that would be very fun way of getting people to come into the museum. So, though we may never know what happened to Captain Turner's mummy, this research reveals a unique subculture in 19th century America, a time and place where the fascination of the ancient world intersected with the museum-like exhibits in the city taverns. The upcoming exhibition at the Alexandria Archaeology Museum will introduce the captivating history of the mummy to a new audience who will leave with a sense of what the ancient Egyptians strived for in death, to be remembered. That's technically the end of my presentation, but we are going to go look at the full timeline. But I hope you enjoyed all that. I support you with mummies not being scary, attaching spookiness from obscure the learning and history. I totally agree. That is a great way to put it. That is a great way to put it. Oh yes. I loved that. Questions? So if y'all have any questions, always feel free. But we're gonna look at this right now. So this is the full timeline of the mummy. I'm making it big enough so y'all can see it. And I will go through this quickly, obviously, because I'll be repeating a lot of the stuff. But I like to read some of the articles and some of the different stuff. So, the 22nd dynasty of Egypt is dates to 945 to 720 BCE. So this is supposedly when Jed Khonsu Uf Ankh presumably lived and died. Based off of the image of the mummy, we can presume that she or he probably did live in Thebes and was probably buried in Thebes. There are certain mummy sarcophagus designs that we can date, that we can place in certain locations, and it typically follows a lot of mummies in Thebes. I actually just realized I forgot I wanted to show other pictures. But where would those be? Okay. Trying to think. Where's the paper? Paper. Here we go. I need to find all the photos. Appendices? I think we're in the appendices. Ugh. This is a whole long, this is a very concise version of the timeline. Nope, that's not the right one. Where are the photos? Nope, not that one. We'll just look at the final research paper. How about that? Here we go. So again, here's that original article. Here's the best image that we can get of this mummy. Here's this other one, which we will look at in a second, the ones from the Barnum Museum. And then this is what I typed up for what I believe the translation is. It's probably a little wrong, but I believe this is the best that I could get. And these are some examples of similar coffins, which helped me date the coffin as well. So this middle one is the coffin Shep and Mut from the Royal Albert Memorial Museum in Exeter, the UK. And this is the coffin of Paddy Hor Pakhered from the British Museum in London. They also have very similar texts, which is where I took some of the like inspiration from, I guess, that thinking, oh, okay, this is maybe what they're talking about instead. This one does have the little wings underneath of it, but neither of these are also Stola coffins, because I will have to say, this is something that I also wasn't very happy with my professor about. My professor asked me what they were, what type of coffin it was, and I was like, I'm not exactly sure. And she's like, look in this book. And I looked in the book, and the book did not tell me. And so then she got really mad at me when she was like, it's a Stola coffin. Why don't you know it's a Stola coffin? And she got very mad at me for it. She kind of yelled at me. Here are some other examples. The coffin of Nes Perem Ub in the British Museum, the coffin of Ka Pama in Zagreb, Croatia, and then a very, very more elaborate one, the coffin of MelissainDeNile at the Oriental University Institute in Chicago. I believe I included that one because of the text. The text is very similar to mine. And so this is just giving an idea of what the possible coloration of the mummy of the sarcophagus was. It mainly looks like it was simple, maybe even not painted like this one. It also indicates that this could have been an outer coffin. Oh my God, Pode. No. I mean, maybe. God, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. And I'm bad at making estimates, so I wouldn't even know. Let's just give it a Google. More than 5, Charlie. How many Egyptian mummies have been found? This woman gives absolutely no number. I mean, yeah, so that's what these things, that like thousands of mummies have been destroyed. Grave robbers have been destroying them since antiquity. I would probably... That's a really good idea. Yeah, I would probably put it in the upper thousands. I might even say that 10,000, getting up there to 10,000, just because. I mean, you gotta suspect it's also the amount of people that lived in Egypt at the time. Like, obviously not everybody was mummified, but like even people in the semi-middle classes could be. And that's the thing, is we're still finding them today. So it's not, they are not, actually, that's one, I was going to talk to you guys about it. They just found a couple new things. But it wasn't, they just, there's an Egypt news thing that came out today that they found some more mummies somewhere. I can't remember where it was. El Asaif, I think. But like, they're finding them constantly, but it's hard to gauge because so many have been destroyed and so many we have records of, and they've gone missing. So many we have these images of, and we're like, I don't know where they are. And I would probably go up maybe to 10,000. But I will say, I actually really wanted my Instagram to try to find every single Egyptian mummy. With the exception, of course, unfortunately, with all of the museums in Cairo. Museums in Cairo have so many mummies, but barely any of them ever get researched unless they're a pharaoh. So I was trying to go through all the other museums and trying to literally do like a post on every single Egyptian mummy. Would that be insane for me to try to make a database of every single Egyptian mummy? I think I'd love it though. I love databases and I love Excel spreadsheets. Okay, so yeah, so those are just some images of what we whoops, wrong one. Of what we thought what it could have looked like. It could have been a variety of colors. So something interesting that I discovered in my research, but we don't have 100% confirmation that this was Captain Turner's mummy. But there was a man named George Reply, we're gonna say, not those two words combined, because that's an unfortunate last name. He wrote a diary. I think we have some sort of diary or letters of his. And so in 1822, so 2 years before the mummy came to America, this man, George, went to a warehouse in Cairo where he saw 12 mummies that had just arrived from Thebes and were being sent to Trieste to be sold from between $30 and $50 a piece. And obviously I don't have evidence on how often mummies were sent from Thebes or from Cairo to Trieste. But this is only about a year before Captain Turner purchased it. And if they didn't send mummies that frequently to Trieste, there could be a very solid chance that Captain Turner's mummy was seen by George Reply and before it was sent to Trieste, which I think is really interesting. And we don't obviously know, but I think it's highly a possibility. So again, Captain Turner purchases the mummy in Trieste. I wanted to actually look in my notes about Captain Turner. Captain Larkin Turner was from Charlestown, Massachusetts, and he captained a ship called the Caroline Augusta. His son wrote a short biography about him, and had a collection of his artifacts that are kept at the Mystic Seaport Museum in Connecticut. Larkin Turner was born in Grafton, Massachusetts in 1781 and apprenticed as a shoemaker before going to sea and becoming a captain at the age of 21. He retired in 1832, so only a couple years after the mummy, he brought the mummy back. And then he served in Massachusetts legislature for 2 years. So again, sometime in 1823 or 1824, I've gotten conflicting reports for both of those years, so it could have been Well, we know that it came, that's the other thing. So we know that it got there in January 8th. So he probably was there in December. Well, actually, I don't know how long it takes to sail a boat across the Atlantic from Trieste through the Mediterranean. So yeah, he probably was there in late 1823 when he purchased it and arrived back in Boston in January 8th, 1824, just in the new year. So there's no indication that Captain Turner ever went to Egypt, so he most likely bought it from Trieste. And I'm reading these stupid comments as I'm reading it. But yeah, so we get to January 8th, where the Boston Commercial Gazette announced that this mummy has arrived on his ship, the Caroline Augusta, examined by John C. Warren. And then one source that says that it arrives in February. And actually, where is... I have a document. Oh, here we go. Where is this one? Nope. Not that one. Oh, here he is. Here it is. Thank you so much, Star. I'm so glad you were here. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. It's okay, we're technically done. I'm just going over some other extra stuff. Have a good night, Star. So this is a document literally called The Description of an Egyptian Mummy presented to the Massachusetts General Hospital with an account of the operation of embalming in ancient and modern times by John C. Warren, MD, Professor of Anatomy and Surgery at Harvard University. So this is not Captain Turner's mummy. This is the first mummy to ever officially enter America. I believe it is Patty Shedef, who is still located at Massachusetts General Hospital, or I think it's called Boston General Hospital or something. And this is, I'm not even joking you, 37 pages of this man going on and on and on. I thought this was going to be like an autopsy of the mummy, but no, it is literally goes on and on and on and on about all of the history and possibly like what they think, how they think mummification and embalming was done. There is so absolutely little talk about the actual mummy. But the cool thing about this is the first American Egyptology paper. It's like super cool. Oh yeah, false mummy is a term originally applied to a substance fabricated so as to resemble the embalming matter of true mummies. False mummies were a thing, y'all. But yeah. He literally did like absolutely zero talk about the actual mummy that he was examining. So in February, the Columbia Centennial published the mummy had arrived and be shortly had visited in Dodgett's repository in Boston. Independent Chronicle and Boston Patriots would be on exhibit for a few weeks and days. New England Galaxy went back to Dodge's repository. And so then it mentions all three doctors. So the Salem Gazette printed the findings of John C. Warren of Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard, Abraham R. Thompson, MD, and J. Stearns Hurd, MD. So all three of these doctors apparently all authenticated the mummy that it was genuine. The Salem Gazette published that the mummy was on display in the Franklin Building in Salem, Massachusetts. So here's an image of the Franklin Building, which then apparently burned at some point. The Exeter Register published a philosophical contemplation on the bringing together of the past and present. That's a pretty good article. It's very interesting, a little weird. And then this was one of my favorite ones. The Salem Gazette published a letter from an admirer signed M talking about the exhibit and the hundreds of people who went to see it. I think I have that one somewhere, but I gotta go find it. Salem Gazette published that the exhibition would close tomorrow and that the Newburyport Herald that it was going to be displayed for a few days. Arrived in Portsmouth, and it would be at Portsmouth Franklin Hall, which is right here. So here's that it was supposed to go to Northampton. Informed that it's an interesting relic of ancient times intended to exhibit in Northampton in the coming summer or autumn. And so we have no newspaper articles that said it was there. So purchased by Ethan Allen Greenwood for his New England Museum. And this is what he wrote. We have evidence. This is what he wrote in his little personal ledger. The 18th, got ready to go to Portland, bought the mummy and put her on board. 19th, last Friday, I bought the Egyptian mummy together with the cases, etc. So that's one indication that it had multiple cases. For $350. I don't know I never found out what the 23D means. Got out bills for the mummy exhibit. So he was the one who created the bills, and he supposedly in this time, this is when he hired somebody to create an image of the mummy. The mummy of the image dates around the 18th of June, 1824. Because there was no image of the mummy before then. Or no, actually there was. Lies. Yeah, lies. I apologize. This image was still, so whoever first started exhibiting, which wasn't Captain Turner, I know that. We have no indication that the captain would have decided to abandon his ship and take this mummy on tour. But whoever did it, they got this image collected, and then the pamphlets were created by Ethan Allen Greenwood. So it was in Portland, Maine until the early July. Excuse me. So this is apparently what his New England Museum in Boston looks like, which article under the title "The Old Lady," saying that an old lady arrived in town, is 3,000 years old, and is being displayed at the Portland Museum. The mummy would still be on display for the celebration of Independence Day of July 4th, which I think is really fun. Genuine and on exhibition, and that it was the final chance to see the mummy. Then it moved to New Providence Museum. All of the different, so apparently this museum also had collections of wax figures, a great variety of miscellaneous curiosities. Although their beginning is small, the proprietors hope the public will find it a worthy patronage. So it says, so this one was, admittance was 25 cents without distinction of age, but then you could get a season ticket for $2, and a gentleman and a lady could go on a date. Pretty much 2 people could get $3, and a family not exceeding 5 persons would be $5 to go and visit the museum. In 1824, it was hiked up from 50 cents to 25 cents to 50 cents, and then it left New England around October 1824. Then we got the undated broadside, probably coming from 1825 sometime. The Scudder's Museum was advertised in the corner of Broadway and Reed Streets. Again, we're not 100% sure that this is that mummy, but it can be presumed. And then he runs it the 24th, 25th. He just keeps on running this same article. So this article also has that one hand is unwrapped. It's most likely Turner's mummy. And I did a lot of research trying to find the exact locations of all of these places that it was on display at. And interestingly, John Scudder's museum seemed to be located in the city's first poorhouse, in City Hall Park, facing Broadway. So if we go to Google and we go up to New York City. So if y'all don't know the history of New York City at the time, obviously during the Revolution, much of Harlem is like where Hamilton lived, and this downtown part, the Battery, which much of this section here got added on, including actually the World Trade Center. Much of this was added on. Much of this area. But this is like some of the oldest parts of New York, when it was New Amsterdam originally. So you go down here, and this is City Hall Park. And unfortunately, this area has a very bad history. There was a African American burial ground that was torn up for City Hall. You can look it up. It's a very sad story. They now have a memorial somewhere. I'm trying to remember where it is. It's really close. They now have like a memorial somewhere for all of the African American people that Bye, Charlie's Dragon. Thank you so much for stopping by. Thanks for all the questions. Yeah, we're wrapping up soon, so I don't mind. I hope you have a good sleep. But this is where, so Reed Street is... Well, I think Reed Street doesn't exist anymore. I think that's the key part. The key problem of why I couldn't find where... Oh no, here's Reed Street. So Broadway and Reed Street. So it's supposed to be somewhere around here. Look, it's another Chipotle. But then there was evidence that it was actually here in City Hall Park, that there was a building called the First Poorhouse, and it might have been here at like City Hall. But that's the other thing, is that in other articles from the same time period indicate that Scudder was displaying it a short distance away at the corner of Broadway and Reed Street. So it's hard to tell which one they're actually talking about. But this is an image of Scudder's American Museum, which obviously this most likely is the corner of Reed Street. This doesn't look like it's in the middle of the park. So talking about a mummy with an unwrapped hand, and that seems to be the unfortunate only indication of when it was this mummy. Then we got the mummy in Connecticut, but we don't know which mummy that is. Then we got the undated broadside, which we think dates from 1827, just based on the proximity. And then we have a jump to 1827 in July with Buffalo, moving all the way up to Buffalo and then going all the way to Rochester, and then moving all the way down to Pittsburgh, which we have to presume happened sometime after September 1828, because so sometime in between September 1828 and December 1828, because the museum didn't even open until September. But then these are the better ones. This is when it gets it would be exhibited at Daniel L. N. M. Schnembley's Tavern. And then it said it will be exhibited in Williamsport on the 10th, and Funkstown on the 11th, and Boonesbury on the 13th. And admittance was 12.5 cents, with children half price, because we are in the middle of like nowhere, Pennsylvania at the moment. Very much central Pennsylvania. So like literally, it's so cute. It actually like follows a little river. Like you can see kind of how this mummy traveled throughout it. Mummy was displayed in Alexandria, printed in two, Alexandria Gazette and the Phoenix Gazette as well. The Daily National Intelligencer said it was display at Gadsby's Hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue in DC. If I remember correctly, I looked this up, and this is, well, actually, that's what I have to look up. Excuse me as you look at my... Here we go. Here's a map. I love making maps. Here's a map of all the places in Egypt, or in America, in the world, that the mummy was. So supposedly was in Thebes, then went to Cairo. Here is Trieste, Italy. And then we go all the way over to America, and here is the path that it takes. With a whole list and description of every place it went to. Dodgett's repository, and I even found like the exact location of where Dodgett's repository was in Boston at the time. Which I think is pretty cool. Where the Franklin building was in Newburyport. Where am I? So Scudder's American Museum, all the locations. So supposedly this is possibly where originally where Scudder's American Museum is, and then it originally was there. Later, the corner of Broadway. Then we go over to Rochester. Lambden's Museum. It took me forever to figure out where Lambden's Museum is, but it supposedly is right here or right here. It seems to have moved. Unfortunately, maybe I did find out where Daniel M. Schnabley's Tavern was, here in Hagerstown. But if you see here, so it goes from Hagerstown to Williamsport to Funkstown, then down to Boonesboro, as it's literally traveling down here to Alexandria. So then we get down to Alexandria, exactly where it was. And then here's the two locations in DC. So it was at the corner of Pennsylvania Avenue. And then it weirdly was like, oh, it's right here. And this is the FBI building, where the FBI building is located right now. And then we go up to this area. So this is the area where you can see that it totally followed the river from Williamsport to Muncie to Milton and possibly up to Wilkes-Barre. There's a little iffy part right there. At the National Hotel. So yeah, the mummy would be displayed on short time on Pennsylvania Avenue between 9th and 10th Street. So obviously some building before the FBI building was where it was displayed there. It would be in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. And then it'd be at the house of R.W. Dunlap in Muncie, Pennsylvania. And then it would be in the towns of West Branch, which is, i.e., is the west branch of the Susquehanna River. So then there's this part where it's like, is this Captain Turner's mummy? I don't know. So the Evening Post published that a museum was being sold along with a list of items. It claims to be a combination of the Washington Museum and the Philadelphia Museum. And it says that a 3,000-year-old mummy is being sold that was brought by Captain Larkin of New York. Our Captain Larkin, of course, is from Massachusetts, but Captain Larkin Lee, who's the other Larkin that we kept having a problem with, he's also from Massachusetts, but he brought this mummy through New York. So I have most likely determined that this is actually Captain Lee's mummy, but we've gone back and forth about it. Because it doesn't make sense that it would have been part of one of the museums when it still kind of possibly went on tour, because it still was in the Pittsburgh Museum about a couple months later. So it went back to Pittsburgh, and then again, the Baltimore Patriot published that the mummy would be at the Washington Museum, which is otherwise known as the Peel Museum or the Baltimore Museum of Fine Arts. And we think this is Captain Turner's mummy, but we're not 100% sure. So then we have all the articles of Scudder. And this is all of the days that he published the same thing. And so even though he's advertising that this mummy is newly arrived from Thebes, we obviously know that he's already displayed this mummy. But it's just a marketing ploy. So then we also have an interesting article saying that the American Museum was going to unwrap a mummy that Wednesday. And then the day before the examination, it was requested to postpone the examination. And then the Boston Post published that this examination and states that the mummy is of an elderly man, so possibly indicating that the Scudder's American Museum did not unwrap Turner's mummy then. So then in 1841, Scudder's Museum goes under. So P.T. Barnum purchased the building and the natural history collection of Scudder's American Museum for less than half of its appraised value. Because the Peel Museum Company, which is another famous museum company from this time period that was based out of Baltimore, they were going to purchase it, but they failed to make their first payments. So then he opened it in January 1st, and it burnt to the ground in the 13th of 1865. So I think that's it, y'all. I have a couple other things I could show you, but I'm trying to think. I think, like, I've showed you everything I could, I think. Oh, I wonder... Okay, this is the last thing I'm going to show y'all. So this is that broadside with the three mummies. And the one thing I wanted to show you is that it's unclear, it's not totally clear which mummy we keep talking about, but they have like number 1, number 2, and number 3. So number 1 is the female mummy that was brought to this country by Captain Turner about a year ago. So we have this list of all the other items that are going to be in this exhibit. So they say number 4 is the upper part of the outer sarcophagus of number 1 and decorated with hieroglyphs. And number 5 is the under part of the same. And then it says the number 6 and 7 are the inner sarcophagi of the same. So this is like the biggest evidence we have that this was actually a double coffin. And supposedly, because they say the decorated with hieroglyphics is on the outer coffin, it means that we've never seen the inside of the coffin. And I hate to say it, the outer coffins are so much uglier, they're so much more basic and simple than the inner coffins. But it means we'll never see what the inside of this coffin looked like. And that makes me sad. It makes me very, very sad. But yeah, I think that's it, y'all. That was a long lecture.